many developments. He has a very international profile. He's CTO at Reorbit, a company currently in Finland. And Kartik Kumar kids created the set search, and he will lead the session as moderator. And I thank both to have the kindness to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, so I think we'll have a fun hour here talking about all things new space, and particularly the challenges and opportunities relating to new space engineering. And I think we have a great person with a lot of expertise to tell us about this. So Ignacio to Chile, welcome as well. And
thanks.
I won't spend too much time on telling your story, but just to give everyone in the audience a bit of a brief. So Ignacio is now CTO of Reorbit, and he's going to be telling us a little bit about the journey of Reorbit. But I think he's had a lot of really interesting experiences. Was previously at ISI, and then in Argentina at INVAP. So I think beyond that, you've also published a book that I think is a valuable resource to the community, especially in light of the trends in new space. And I think what is interesting, of course, is that new space is quite an ambiguous term. And, I think if you're able to help shed some light on what new space is to you, and particularly from the technical side, what it means and how it contrasts with perhaps the more traditional approach towards systems engineering for space, that would be great. So with that said, I'll hand the floor to you, and looking forward to your presentation.
Cool. Thanks, Kartik. Thank you very much for the introduction. Very accurate. I will just maybe elaborate a little bit on my background or my experience. As Kartik said, I'm currently CTO at Reorbit. CTO in this context means somehow the person, I have the responsibility as a CTO in the company to try to turn the vision into actual, reliable technology that can fly. And that transformation between ideas into actual hardware and software is complex, and there's no one single way of doing it. And in my take, what being CTO means, at least in Reorbit, is that I'm at least all the time thinking how to turn the abstract into actual things that fly. And some people say that CTO means Chief Talking Officer, and there's a little bit of that as well, because with a lot of thinking, there's a lot of talking, and I do a lot of that as well. So you will definitely get that impression if you ask someone from Reorbit, what is it that I do? I talk a lot. Before Reorbit, as Kartik mentioned, I was spending few years, quite some years at ISI. ISI is a Finnish company doing radar microsatellites. My time there was split into halves. First half was leading the whole software of the company, and then the second half was taking the role of VP of engineering. And then they had some connection, but the first half was very, very technical. Of course, a lot of coding and debugging and whatnot. The second half was more managerial and kind of scaling the tech organization from few tens of engineers into something bigger. So there was a lot of learning there, and it was a very fun time. And before and ISI marked my entry into the new space, if you want. Before ISI, I was in INVAP. INVAP is a company located in a very beautiful city in the southern part of Argentina called Bariloche. INVAP is a little bit more into the space projects that fit into what you can call more like the classic space. Bigger satellites, heavier satellites for governmental missions, scientific missions, defense missions. More maybe salient missions that I can comment about is SAOCOM, which is another radar satellite, which is very big. You need to see the size of that satellite. It's just amazing. SAOCOM 1A, SAOCOM 1B, and then other satellites for scientific missions. So that is me. And before I came into space, which was maybe 12, 13 years ago. Before that, I did some other jobs in industrial embedded software and whatnot. So it's overall 20 years like doing different flavors of technology. So as you can see, at least the space track that I've been, or the space path that I took in this last like 12, 13 years shows connecting factor between companies doing space, but still different styles of space. I mean, I mentioned this classic space in the beginning, and then more like entering the new space. So as soon as I entered new space, I wanted to observe in a way what new space was. And that book that I wrote somehow captures a little bit of that observation. And the book is not really based in one single company or my experience in that particular company, but more like, because being in the new space also makes you connect with many other actors in the industry, because there are a lot of small companies doing different things. So you get very connected to what's out there. So when I was observing, as I said, I was all the time observing the new space approach. And I was observing not only my company, because that could be a little bit of a bias. I was also trying to observe, okay, what are others doing, and what is the connecting sort of factor between all these people doing new space. So the book captures a little bit of that. So with all that being said, I will now explain what is it that I'm doing today. As I said, I'm CTO of Reorbit, and then I will try to explain what Reorbit is doing, and then what is somehow my work in Reorbit, and what is the grand vision of Reorbit. So that's that. So as I said, well, I mean, again, this presentation is a little bit of a quick introduction, so don't expect many details, but I tried to capture, I didn't want to bore everyone with like pointless details. So I tried to capture the gist of it. And this is just like 12 slides. So don't expect anything very, very long. And as I said, quick intro and a little bit of the gist of it. So, I mean, every company needs to have a driver. If you don't have a driver, it's very hard to push forward. You need to have something that kind of force you, or not to force you, but more like pushes you ahead. And the idea of the circle is an idea that it really fits our vision, because the circle is that geometrical form that comes in a loop, and in a way it kind of captures what you're trying to do here. And we have a vision, we have a mission, and we have some core beliefs that we are not willing to negotiate, let's say. So whatever we see that we're doing at Reorbit, these core beliefs are aligning every decision and every discussion we have. Our vision as a company is we want to, of course, play a role in the collective effort of space exploration, and the collective word is key here. So we don't believe in future space exploration done by isolated entities. We believe in a future space exploration where all different entities can somehow connect and do something higher than the sum of the parts, basically. The mission, well, we want to make the access to space easy. I will not use the word democratize, because if you read my book, you will get to know what I believe about that word. So I'm not going to use that term. We're trying to make things, or we are working on trying to make things a little bit easier and more affordable. And the concept of reusability is central into this thing, because I will talk about this a bit later in the presentation, that, well, reusability is not very, it doesn't really stand out as a characteristic of the current way of doing space. So that's our mission, and also it's very strong for us to always remember that reusability is at the very front, at the very center of what we're trying to do. And then the core beliefs, of course, sustainability, innovation, and adaptability. And these three things may sound as buzzwords and may sound as words coming from some marketing team, but believe me, we are trying to understand what these three things mean and how those three concepts impact in the way that we take decisions. Sustainability, because space is not infinite, at least as a natural resource, there is a limited access into it, at least in the most popular areas of the very tiny part of the universe that we are. Innovation, because of course we want to keep on pushing the boundaries because that's what we love to do, and adaptability because you never know what's coming next, and then if you come up with something that it's only serving a particular scenario or context or current context, then you are cooked, when things change, because things change, and you need to always be ready to adapt to the changes. So that's why adaptability is a core belief that we are not also willing to negotiate. Then how it started, what brought me in a way into Reorbit is that, well, I started to observe, or it started to stand out in a very vivid manner, that space is still done very, very bespoke. Not only that, it's also done in a very non-collaborative way, and still the architectures are very monolithic and single use and rigid, if you want. And maybe I didn't highlight the word architecture for no reason here. It's about architecture. So the technology may advance. As you know, they're like great microprocessors. They're like great memories. They're like great like processing units. So technology is in a way advancing. What is not really advancing in the same way is the architectures that we use to put all those modern things together. So that's why when I try to, and then I continue reading this, that I'm saying that in some way, the way that space is done is still like computers in the 60s or the pre-internet era. And again, I'm not saying that the microprocessors are like in the 60s, because they are not. What I'm saying is that somehow architectures are following that mindset, that you create the satellite does its thing, isolated from any other satellites and contexts, and then you operate that thing with a very specific purpose throughout its life cycle. In a way, it feels similar to the mainframes back in the 60s, where they were coming for a specific use, to compute, to be a computational unit in a university, or to compute missile trajectories. You would have a specific use of a mainframe. In a way, satellites are still connected to that mindset, and that's why all these things started. That we started to observe that, and then we wanted to do something about this. That's perhaps the genesis of Reorbit, observing the state of affairs. More yellow color, more bullets. I'll try to unpack a little bit here. Of course, when we observed these last few things that I mentioned in the previous slide, it didn't come without challenges, or it didn't come without questions, because as soon as we started to say, okay, how do we tackle the current state of affairs, questions popped up, and we started to try to address them. One thing, or one concept that becomes very at the forefront is that somehow form has been historically following function, in a way that you build the satellite as a metallic box to do something. And if we want to break down that a little bit and be a little bit more modular in orbit, well, then form needs to stop following function. And then we need to break the concept of that satellite doing that thing, and then break it into flocks of n satellites doing something and cooperating for a common goal. So that's a bit of a first mental adjustment that we had to do here. Then the next concept was reconfigurability. It's a tricky word. We also wanted to make sure that, hey, whatever is it that we're doing here, can we make it that the mission of that flock of satellites can be redefined on the fly? So that was another challenge. Then the next one is like what is called like functional fixedness, in a way that we all have this bias that we struggle to understand an object working in a different purpose than we kind of historically know. So satellites, it's very hard to think that all of a sudden a metallic box can be exploded into different bits and collaborate in different sort of tasks and different roles, and that is a little bit of colliding with the way that we think. It's very hard to think about a hammer used for something outside of the typical use of a hammer, even though it can be used for something else. So we have this bias, and we had to fight a little bit against it. And then the last one is sustainability by design. Again, not the buzzword, but more like, how do we make sure that the designs we make will make a good use of space, not for the current use of space, but also for the future, in a cost-effective way, because that is the key. The key is that to make something sustainable, sometimes you end up paying a somewhat higher cost, but how can we somehow take the proper decisions to do sustainable designs while still being competitive, because you as a company need to stay competitive in the market. So that's a little bit of the challenges that somehow we faced when we wanted to dive deeper into the remarks of this slide, right? And also we saw that while space is kind of approaching it to something like tipping point, right? I mean, they're like, still space operations are like largely manual, and you would be surprised. I mean, you will, if you haven't been around how satellites are operated, as soon as you will get close to operations, you will see that there's a lot of manual work. Of course, there's a lot of automation as well, but there's still a very human-centered approach to it. Again, the functional coupling, which is very tight, makes that sometimes impossible that a satellite that has a working bus all of a sudden loses the payload because the payload has acted up, because space is hard. And then all of a sudden the whole thing is pointless because you have no payload, you have no mission. So again, this tipping point, and why I'm calling it a tipping point, because with the space debris question increasing and the space sustainability concern increasing, then losing a whole platform because of a small short circuit in a payload, well, that's something that cannot really continue if you want to have this vision of future space exploration. And then the third bullet, again, you see a lot of constellations happening and coming together, and everyone is trying to launch a constellation nowadays. Fine. Those constellations still are somehow composed of isolated satellites which are not aware of the existence of other satellites. So you know, there is this phrase that, you know, a team is a group, but a team, let's say a team is a group, but a group is not always a team, meaning that you can put satellites together and still you don't have a team of satellites. You have a group of satellites. So that's why you still have this. I mean, when you search around and you see the constellations coming into the market, except a few exceptions, most of the other constellations are just loose groups of satellites. So that's why I'm saying that tipping point, because we cannot really sustain this. And it's also a bit of a waste of resources, because if you have a constellation of satellites flying, why not have those satellites talking to each other somehow, you know, like doing data networking, or doing like something, you know, collaborative that you know, adds a little bit on top of that. I mean, I'm just throwing some idea, but there's definitely like better use of those group of satellites than just, you know, treating them as bubbles. And then, of course, I mean, this is a bit of I'm trying to tease here a little bit the audience that the current class of satellites will not take us there. And with there, I mean, with these topics that I put in this slide, everyone now is talking about coming back to the moon. Everyone is talking about manufacturing things in orbit. Of course, Mars exploration, it's been on the hype. Asteroid mining, everyone is talking about this. And my thesis, and when I say mine, I say also like Reorbit's thesis, is that the current architectures are incompatible with these future explorations. Because if you want to go to Mars, are you going to somehow develop every time, you know, a box with a specific function to do something specific in Mars? No, most likely you will have to end up creating a bit of a, you know, distributed architecture to do different things. For example, refueling stations. I mean, I'm just like dreaming big now, but you will need a little bit of modularity to eventually reach to Mars, and you cannot reach there by just doing space the Apollo way, let's say. Same for asteroid mining and the other applications. And maybe the paradigm of all this is the James Webb Telescope, which is now everyone is somehow talking about it, because it's such a complex and expensive mission and tricky that somehow what I'm trying to use here James Webb for is to James Webb Telescope for is that I try to put it as the paradigm of this concept of a lot of functionality into one single entity, let's say. And it's very obvious, but you need to think a little bit about the risks that are involved in this project, and that's why it's taking so long and so much money and so much preparation, because there's so high stakes, such high stakes into this mission, because there's almost no room for failure. I mean, in the Hubble telescope, you could afford to service it. Actually, it was done like multiple ways. I mean, to service the telescope and like under some, when there were some issues, it was possible to service it. But the James Webb is not possible to service it, meaning that you need to be like 200% sure that this will work. And what I'm trying to bring here into the discussion is that eventually the technology could be going in a way that, like, future space telescopes could be an aggregation of smaller elements in a way that you don't have to launch the whole thing at once in one rocket. That could somehow, and I wish James Webb Telescope, of course, the best launch possible. What I'm saying is that, can you imagine the amount of, how to say, heart-stopping feelings that there will be when the James Webb Telescope will launch in whatever that will be, like end of this year or maybe next year. So the architecture could be done, if we work in the proper way, that somehow you don't have to put such high risk in one single rocket. You can launch the space telescope in bits. And I agree that I'm oversimplifying many things here, because, for example, that sun protector that you see here in the screen is huge. I mean, you have seen perhaps a picture in the internet that it's just like, it's massive. So I'm not saying that the James Webb Telescope could have been done in a modular way. What I'm saying is that we need to change the thinking to eventually or potentially think about space telescopes done in a modular way. So I have maybe so far commented how the space industry is going and what are the challenges, and how Reorbit believes that the future that is waiting for the space industry is in some way misaligned with the current way of doing space architectures. Now I'm going to comment a little bit on what is it that we are doing, because it's not only about talking, it's also about like sitting and doing some work to try to offer something to change this. So we have maybe 3 steps or 3 ingredients that kind of combine into something tangible. But basically what we are doing, we're trying to grow technologies to enable a realistic on-orbit modular distributed architecture. And that needs to be done in many different levels. I mean, one level is that we are choosing very modular avionics designs. And why this? I commented in the second or third slide that satellites are somehow still like computers in the 60s during the mainframe era. And in a way, we're trying to use an approach which is closer to the current computing approach. For example, for gaming PCs, when you need to assemble a gaming PC because you want to play some, like, whatever, Call of Duty, whatever, you just go and select the parts from the market, and then you put them in a sort of standard, motherboard, and then you just somehow install the software, and then you are playing after maybe a few hours of assembling things. Space is very different in the way that it works. It's very far from this gaming PC concept, but we're trying to work in a way that it becomes that vision closer, that somehow the satellite becomes like a gaming PC that you can choose what modules to use, what modules not to use depending on the mission. And that's the modular avionics design approach that we have. We use standard form factors, standard backplanes, high-speed serial interconnects. There's a lot of technical jargon here, but what it means is that, as I said, we don't spend so much time into defining an ad hoc avionics architecture. We just choose what's in the market because the market has grown already quite a lot to offer options to go this way. Then the one in the middle is the software. Of course, I mentioned the gaming analogy, and then of course, if you want to play World of Warcraft, you need software, you need an operating system, you need everything that World of Warcraft can use to run. And we have to do the same, because at the same time, if you want to be very agnostic from the underlying hardware, we need to be very clever on the software to somehow make sure that we can interoperate with different suppliers and whatnot, and interfaces. So there is a strong software-defined approach. I'm a software person, so I'm guessing that there's also a little bit of that here, that I strongly believe that the software is, in a way, a very strong asset in space. And that's something that I truly believe. And it's not just the software, also it has to be about the autonomy, because when you're flying a flock of satellites or a formation of many satellites, let's say like tens of satellites or smaller satellites or building blocks, you cannot afford to operate each one of those blocks individually. You need to somehow equip them with capabilities of trying to at least be autonomous in the sense of recovering after things or after situations. And there's a lot of work to do there, because we need to work on autonomous failure detection, isolation, and correction, autonomous orbits, orbit determination and attitude determination, autonomous station keeping, autonomous collision avoidance. So when you have a flock flying on top of your head, then the flock needs to become a bit of a individual, if you want, and to turn parts into a big individual, well, you need to somehow couple them in a clever way, and that's a key part of our work. And as I said, when you have this flock flying over your head, those little things or building blocks need to also like talk to each other, because they need to exchange information to understand where the other one is, what they need to exchange data, payload data, whatever. So there's a lot of networking and data flow. So basically we have a lot of work in terms of space data networking and autonomous formation keeping capabilities, because these two elements on the left and on the middle, this is more like on the satellite individually, if you want, but then that's not enough. I mean, you need to somehow create also something that will make the satellites aware from other satellites, and that's the sort of the third column here in this slide, that the cooperative part of this, that the building blocks need to be aware of the companions, let's say. Then they could have different roles. You could have a building block which is a processing block, and then you have another block which is the Earth observation block. So the roles can change, and our architecture needs to accommodate for the customer defining that. So and here in this slide, I was trying to maybe bring some visibility on okay, what is it that the applications we are targeting here. And when you move from left to the right, you're moving from the known to the futuristic, let's say. And of course, our current architecture can still serve a standalone satellite or a constellation. But we are targeting things as multi-static flocks. For example, when you have an Earth observation flock of satellites with, for example, different cameras or different type of radars, or a multi-static radar where one element can shoot the radar signal and other elements are collecting, and then you somehow end up having a huge satellite with super impressive resolution. So we are targeting that. And then there's like more futuristic stuff as you move to the right, the debris removal, in-orbit inspection, distributed architecture, refueling, and whatnot. So the remark here on the lower side of the slide is somehow capturing the gist of it, that we're trying to enable space applications from the more established to the future. And why we're doing this is because you when you're entering a market somehow with something very futuristic, it happens that the gap between the current and the future could be too thick, and somehow you need to provide something that also is familiar or looks familiar for the current mindsets or the current paradigms. And that's why we cannot come and say, oh, you have the best architecture for refueling, where actually right now there are like very little companies trying to do in-orbit refueling. Perhaps also because there is no one or not a lot of actors doing this distributed architectures anyway. This is a little bit of the chicken and the egg. But we're trying to say here is that that the technology that we are envisioning can work to be used in the current way of thinking about space, but it's very much looking into the future, because that's what basically started the whole thing for us, that we are thinking that the current way of doing space will not sustain. So that's why we are coming up with this. Yeah, and in space, there is something that a lot of people talk about space, and there's a lot of empty talk about space and about very futuristic visions. And then there's perhaps the only way of showing that something works is by doing it. And walking the talk is usually the phrase that captures the gist, that in a way that we want to make sure that all those slides that I showed before are not just empty talk, but more like, something that is just introducing to something that will fly and you will get to see flying. And that's the demo mission for us that we have called Ukko. Ukko is a Finnish mythological figure that we found that connects very well with this idea. So it's a proof of concept. We'll have 2 satellites, 2 CubeSats, and we want to go a little bit nuts and demonstrate many things here. The autonomy, and that's a lot, because we need to demonstrate time series forecasting. We need to demonstrate auto FDR, orbit keeping. In orbit servicing, we will, of course, rehearse the rendezvous and proximity maneuver, reconfigurability. The networking part of this, we will, put all the effort to make sure that these satellites during the demo mission can also network. And the features out of this demo mission is that, again, we want to somehow show the concept. We want to make sure that it's seen what you can do with this. Also with minimal human supervision, because as I said, we are claiming that everything is too manual. So, let's do something to show that, you can go fully autonomous and automated. Recreate scenarios. For example, I said that, a failed payload is a failed mission nowadays. So, okay, we want to recreate that, one of the satellites, acts up, because as I said, space is hard. And then the satellite can somehow still use the companion satellite to do something. If the payload is gone, fine, but we can still try to access the satellite and do like some things. And then the last bullet is a little bit of this concept of abstraction layer, that we want to create the individual out of the parts, meaning that treating the flock as one single satellite. And a great sort of a Turing test that we would like to eventually run on this demo mission is that an operator on the ground shouldn't be able to tell if it's operating, or if he or she is operating 1, 2 satellites or 10 satellites, in a way that we are aiming to make sure that operating a space asset, let's just call it that way, is independent from, how many building blocks is this space asset made of. So that's a little bit of the idea. And since a lot of the people we have in the company have been dealing with actual satellites and actual missions, I think we have a great opportunity to show that we can walk the talk and not just put PowerPoints, because that's easy, but the real challenge comes when you need to build the things and just launch them and operate them. So so that's a little bit of the gist of it. I didn't want to bore with unnecessary details, but I'm of course open for questions about any details. If I have the answers and I can share the answers, I will share. If I don't know, I'll just say I don't know. I hope that everyone is okay with it. Thank you very much. And no, I yield the floor for whatever.
Yeah, well, thanks, Ignacio, for a really interesting talk. And I think you touched on many topics that in themselves, I guess you could fill an hour or more talking about. Yeah. So we have, I believe, in this session another 25 minutes or so. So what I propose is I have some burning questions. And so I'd love to chat with you about a few things that you mentioned that I think, you have some unique insights into, and some expertise and even leadership, I would say. So that would be, I think, great to just hear your thoughts on a few topics that I have in mind. And in the meantime, those in the audience can use the poll link to submit questions. We've got a couple of questions already, but I think this is also a chance for anybody in the audience who is interested in new space in general, and then the challenges around and opportunities around technology to pose questions. So I would say let's start. I have a few questions in mind, and then we can kind of switch to the audience questions as they pop up. So the theme of this, the general theme of this conference, and I believe of the SSP this year, and I think just a prevailing sentiment of, where what the view is, the prevailing view in the world is on this topic of sustainability, right? And you mentioned that as a very important core belief and value for Reorbit. And I was wondering, if you could maybe dig a little deeper in this, and what I would particularly like to hear is on two topics. Number one, as a business and a startup, right, you have the need to build cash flow to generate perhaps a return on investment for even investors, or for deliver to your customers. And at times, this can be at odds with the goals of being sustainable. So I would love to hear from you how you're balancing these different forces, and if you see them as being entirely aligned, or if there are ways in which within the company you are balancing this out. And then particularly given your position as CTO when it comes to the technology side of it, how that manifests in the architectures and the designs and the choices that you're making for the kinds of systems you're developing. So that's the first question on this topic of sustainability. And maybe just a second one to follow up on that would be great to hear about is what your, so I believe very strongly in this idea of no free lunch, right? So if you're going to do something, you have to generally not do something else, or something else has to give way. And so just to get your thought on, to be sustainable, what is that costing you as a business, and particularly I would say on the technical architecture side? What are you not able to do because you are choosing to be sustainable? And I think it would be great to hear that, and I think the audience would probably love to hear how you do that trade-off, when you're doing the technical design. If both of these questions kind of make sense to you.
Yeah, they do. Thanks. Let's go for the first one. So I think I mentioned somewhere in the slides that sustainability in a cost-effective way, I think I mentioned, and that's the key. Sustainability brings sometimes higher costs, and some you mentioned like higher costs, at least initially, let's say, and you mentioned something like very, very accurate, that you're a company, you need to pay the bills, so you need to somehow also be up to the expectations of the people who have trusted your vision, investors, the people on the company, and whatnot. And I think the key on that is what I mentioned somewhere in the end, that when I was mentioning the connecting between the current and the future missions, the standalone missions on the constellations into the refueling and whatnot into the far right. I think the key is that you somehow think of the technology that you can still use for the current approach, and you gain the traction slowly by getting the buy-in from the current actors into seeing what they can do with the technology that you are bringing together. What I'm saying with this is that the key to me looks like creating technology that can have a skin that looks very familiar to you, or a face that you can really recognize, but underneath it has very advanced features, let's say, or more advanced features that you start to show in healthy doses, let's say, to the adopters of your technology. Because if all of a sudden you bring with everything, you will overwhelm, and then people will not get to connect what they know with what they can do. So that's why I only believe in the familiarity as a connecting point between the current way of doing space and the future way, and doing that in a cost-effective way. I think it kind of makes sense, because the way that space is done today is also because of cost. I mean, there's very strong driver of making things as cheap as possible. So that's why you many times end up into this very, rigid and monolithic architectures, because when you connect so closely things together, you sometimes can do things a little bit, more cost effective if you want. So that's why, in that sense, we can go slowly and take evolutionary steps in a way that we grow the current way into the future one in steps, let's say, but not in giant steps. And also that also impacts in the cost, because we can go very, let's say, we can go reasonably aggressive, but still not suicidal when it comes to adopting those technological steps. But the pace needs to be constant. Let's say we cannot just stop and accommodate and say, okay, this is what we do. Space has somehow win over, and then we just give up. No, we are. That's why the beliefs in the first slide. We are strongly believing in this way of doing space, and we just need to somehow give the cards in a incremental manner. And also that impacts the cost. We can grow the cost into see how things are going, and also hear the market and see what's the response of the market, and then adjust accordingly as well. And the second one, what was the second one again?
The second one was just a little bit more tangibly, like from the engineering side. If you could give an example, for instance, of an architecture choice that you have made that is specifically, because of this belief, So you talk about modularity, things like that, but even maybe more concretely to give people in the audience an idea of a stuff like that, good. Where you do something.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I guess that going for this backplane form factors, where we just choose, we just go and buy the backplane in the market, and then we just put boards in slots, and then we can scale up and down depending on the mission. If a mission wants to have some resources that the other mission doesn't want, for us is a board being on a slot or not being on a slot. So for us, that's perhaps the best example that I can give on what is a tangible technical decision that is very different, at least to what I know in space. And I think the key, because backplanes have existed for decades, but the key is to choose standard backplanes, not to choose ad hoc backplanes as many companies do, because they still have this idea of doing everything their own way. So we want to discard that idea of doing things our own way. We don't want to do things our own way. We want to choose what's in the market and just integrate, because that's our main role here as systems integrators and architects, not as hardware developers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in fact, you mentioned something during your talk that was quite triggered me a lot, because in my own professional experience, it's something that we encounter quite a lot, which is there is a difference between market pull and technology push, right?
Yeah.
And I think this vision that you're showing, what makes it, at least in my experience, what makes it hard to execute on something that seems so logical, like, hey, modularizing, standardizing, etc., is that the market has to be receptive to that. And you sort of pointed to that earlier, which is to say you need to almost feed the market step by step so that people are able to connect it to what they know.
Yeah.
But I'm curious also in this then, how do you, because on one side you want to show that you're radically changing the way of thinking about space, but on the other side you don't want to be so radical, because that can be off-putting and it'd be a reason that people think, this is either too high risk, or probably there's hidden costs in this, or there's things I don't understand.
No.
So how do you bridge that, where you do show I'm being innovative, but wait, don't be so scared. This is all understandable. We can walk you through the mental model on how to adopt different architecture.
I think the key is to change your skin as you go, because we can, as I said, we can still have a skin of very known way of doing space. We can put that skin on and act that way, and that will eventually put us on the path of serving a customer, for example, for an Earth observation constellation, just to put an example. And then what they got is something with a skin that looks classic, but then along the way we say, hey, you know what you actually bought is this. Of course we will try to hint before we are in orbit, but what I'm saying is that the key is to change the skin in the right time, to say, hey, you have bought what you wanted, because we can also act that way, but look what you got, right? It's not like I don't want to treat it like an Easter egg, but more like make sure that we don't look so radical that everyone will just look away, but more like look not so radical. And then when people have already, embarked themselves into the reorbit sort of boat, let's say, then we say, oh, you know what, this boat can also like do this, look, and then we just, showcase, why. And also the customer may say, you know what, I don't want that because, it's fine, it's great, but I'm still fine with this. Great. I mean, we don't mind. I mean, as I said, the use case is up to the customer, and we want to make sure that we look also familiar enough, to be also like chosen as a current actor, because we don't want to be looked, as the futuristic, space company. That would be too risky for us.
Yeah, and so talking a little bit, so to execute on this vision, and particularly, I like this analogy of going from the mainframe era to, sort of the general purpose computing, as I would describe it, kind of the gamer rig and things like that. Yeah. It requires a certain amount of talent in the industry, people with these skills. And I know that you have quite a extensive background, I think also from outside of space on the embedded systems side, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So can you speak to a little bit what kind of people are needed in the space sector, and do you believe that the people are there? Do you believe that we need an influx of new talent to be able to actually make this transition? Because all these ideas are great, but if we don't have the right people with the right skills to execute on this, then we end up with just like a gap that can't be bridged. So thinking in terms of you as a company, Reorbit, and then maybe even extending it industry-wide, since you worked at a number of companies, do you feel like the talent pool is sufficient, or do you feel that we actually need to draw in people from the telecoms industry and other sectors that are able to manifest this kind of vision towards more general purpose modularized computing and architectures?
I think there is a very strong sort of halo effect on satellites that somehow, yes, there are like some specific areas where you need very specific knowledge. Yes, but I would say if you want to use a bit of a Pareto rule here, 80% of the skills that you need for a satellite you can find from industries that don't go to orbit, let's say. I don't see, as an embedded software person, I have never seen a strong difference between coding for a digital billboard for a factory or coding for a satellite. And bear with me with the analogy. What I'm saying is that there are like some particular differences when it comes to mission critical concepts, a little bit on the engineering process, on the testing and the quality. I get that it's not the same. I'm not trying to say that they're just like equivalent, but from a skill perspective, you can bring someone from the industry and only train the person to the topics that are needed to know, mostly about the engineering process, not about the coding, because C code for a satellite looks the same as C code for a refrigerator. But it's just that there are some things that you need to somehow take into account that can be trained. So I understand that it's not super simple to find technical resources in the market, but it's not as difficult as it looks, except for those very specific tasks, maybe about attitude control, about orbit station keeping. Those things are perhaps more specialized, but those account for the maybe 10% of the talent that you need for the satellite. So I'm usually trying to remove that halo effect from satellites as very special machines. They're not so special. So in that sense, I'm with a little bit Copernicus there, that nothing is really special. Everything it's more or less the same. As a refrigerator and a satellite are not so distant as people may believe. Again, bear with me with the analogies, right? I'm just saying that when you're a startup, you're small, you cannot afford to get experts. Survive with people from the industry and train them. If you happen to have someone in the team that has been around, well, that person can be a mentor. So mentoring is key.
Yeah, so maybe before we transition to the audience question, so I have that, the reason I asked it was a bit of a loaded question, because I actually share that belief with you. And in fact, You mentioned you don't like the word, but I'll use the word, which is that I think there is an opportunity in terms of the job market to quote unquote democratize space, which is to make space look less special to the rest of the world. And I think there are engineers who would be fantastic in this industry that are scared because they think I need to have some PhD in some crazy field before I can work on a satellite. Whereas what you're describing is, I think, the message we should be getting out, which is if you've worked on a refrigerator and written C code, you actually have a very strong skill set to bring to the space sector. And I'm glad to hear that you see it that way. And I think it's also, so maybe my last question before we transition is, and then it's again a little bit loaded because I guess I'm leading the question a bit, but in one sentence, do you have a way to describe what distinguishes new space engineering from traditional engineering in this sense? Like, I know this can be like a very long topic, but like if you had to describe it in one sentence and somebody said, well, what is new space engineering? And how is it distinguished from traditional engineering?
Oh, that's a challenging one. I'm trying to pack it into one sentence. I think the word that comes is lightweight. I mean, what I'm saying is that you need to have, you cannot cut corners in such a violent way that you will stop doing engineering. You still need to do engineering, but you need to do it in a lightweight manner, let's say. So you need to be lean. I mean, I hate the word also because lean has been like abused as a word lately, but you have to be lean in a way that you need to remove the waste from what actually brings signal over the noise. And then that's the key. I mean, if you call yourself new space, but then you just add a lot of that noise that comes from other industries, you are cooked because you don't have time, you don't have a runway, you don't have money. It doesn't work. So I think it's lightweight. You need to do engineering and sound engineering, but in a lightweight manner.
That's the word of the day, I think, then lightweight. So maybe I've seen there are a few audience questions, and I think it's maybe a good moment to transition to them. I can read them out.
I can also read them, maybe.
Don't worry. Priyanka will be sharing the screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I share the polyp?
Yes, Priyanka, please share the questions.
Okay, so maybe I'll read them out for the benefit of the audience in case somebody's not looking closely at their screen. So the question reads, I imagine this would have been backed up with a trade study between mission flexibility versus risk. But aside from the numbers, how would you push for a more modular design with an audience that is very risk averse? I think we talked a little bit about this. This is saying, how do you sell this, what could be perceived as a very radical thing to say, yes, modularity on the face of it makes sense, but then you have people in this industry who are set in ways that maybe makes them feel that's very risky.
Yeah, but I think the key there is the word risky, because you are thinking risk in the classic way. Because risk, you are thinking about losing perhaps the James Webb Telescope or losing the whole mission. Now, if you go modular, I mean, maybe if you go into a mission that is composed of different smaller bits flying together in a cooperative manner, then risk, in a way, is perceived in a different manner because you are not losing the whole mission anymore. You're losing one part of it. So I don't want to say that risk sort of subdivides by the amount of building blocks you have, because still you have roles and then you have different critical roles that you may still lose. But maybe the question here is to think about risk in the new way or in the modular way, not risk in the classic way. I mean, if risk here was in that sense, because maybe, again, when we say an audience that is very risk adverse, is risk adverse on the space that they know. And that's why I'm talking about like walking the talk. I mean, we need to show them that the technology that we are envisioning works, and then slowly transitioning them to understand risk in a different way.
So that is also about building, if I think about it in that terms, it's also building trust, right? It's investing in building trust with the stakeholder so that they can see that you are walking the walk and that they can, in some sense, update their understanding of risk to account for your new way of doing
yes,
things.
I agree. And that's why reliability, I mean, talking about lightweight in the beginning or a few minutes ago, you cannot be super lightweight still on making things reliable, because even though they're like split in different building blocks, you still want to make sure that those work. And also you make sure that you take into account the things that happen in space. So reliability, again, you need to do it in a lightweight but clever way, because you cannot spend, of course, like tens of years, doing failure analysis, but you still need to take it into account, of course.
Okay, great. So perhaps we can move to the next question so we can get everyone's question in. So this one seems to be addressed to me, but I'd like to actually ask you this question as well, because I'm sure, given the fact that you've also moved between countries and seen different organizations, that you have a view on this. So the question is, how can university faculties diversify their programs more to be space friendly? I think this comes to this topic that, the space industry and space studies and things like that is still sort of this niche thingy that people think, mainstream society, we are somewhat weird people, right? Working on these things that fly high above our heads. Do you have a thought on how can we normalize, let's say, space and have it be more readily adopted in, different universities and programs like that?
I have seen that maybe, I guess that the space startup ecosystem and universities could maybe work a little bit closer than they do. And how to diversify programs? Well, I am guessing that one thing to try to maximize is exposure expose the universities what space really means, like practical space, and somehow use it as a feedback loop to tune the programs to make them practical and with lowering the barrier from the moment that you get your degree and you are faced into the elements of the industry. So maybe one thing to improve, and I have seen this also here while being in Finland, that maybe the startup ecosystem and the university need to work a little bit more like seamlessly, and there has to be maybe more programs and more collaborations, maybe more. I'm not sure if it's like because there are internships, and I get that, but it's I'm talking about something else that people and the students in the universities can see a little bit more vividly what it means to do space and more specifically like new space maybe. So maybe I would suggest closer collaboration between the new space ecosystem and the universities.
Yeah, I think that's a great practical step that can be taken, and I agree with you. There could probably be stronger ties that way. Just to add my 2 cents, I also think that the onus is on us in the space sector to make ourselves more accessible. And I think one of the things I noticed from talking to a lot of people is that most people don't know how much of their daily life is already enabled by space, and so that's on us, right? It's on us to spend the time and to show people the value. And I think that in itself will create perhaps more demand and more interest and perhaps groundswell.
And also there is usually a pointless secrecy and pointless, jealousy when it comes to sharing information, when it comes to space, because maybe coming from, older times, when I don't really know from where it comes, but still companies sometimes are reluctant of sharing even information that no one really would do anything, So in a way that startups sometimes have a hard time understanding what information is critical not to share because of, trade secrets and whatnot, versus what can be totally shared. And some companies put the bar just too high, which is a problem, because then they become, very, very opaque.
So I think we've reached the end of the session. I know that there's a next session to go on to. I believe that there was one more question. Perhaps we can take 30 seconds to look at it, and then we don't put the program off. So this is on policy aspects of new space and the lack of inclusion. I think it looks like it's 2 questions. Perhaps we'll take the first one. Do you have any thoughts? I know your focus is, of course, on technical architectures and CTO, perhaps more on the technology side of it, but do you have thoughts on how policy can be evolved to be more inclusive as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it connects to the previous remark that somehow knowledge sharing needs to be better done in space, and also in the new space, startup ecosystem. And I'm also thinking that, partnerships or programs with, non-spacefaring countries should be more common than they are, and somehow companies should sometimes maybe have to do it. Not force them to do it, but somehow they should contribute back in some way for whatever they do. And maybe this is a way that they could contribute, that they could, engage with spacefaring countries in some way and transfer some level of knowledge, at least at the higher level, because when it's a country perhaps with not so deep experience, you don't have to go into the, into the bones. You can keep it a bit generic, but I guess that it's a little bit of the social responsibility of companies that it's sometimes, not enough. And I agree that more could be done here.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on, a good call to action and a positive step for people to reflect on. So yeah, Ignacio, I want to thank you for providing a very interesting talk and for answering all of the questions over the last 20-25 minutes. I'm going to take the liberty to say that if people have further questions, that they can reach out to you. I hope you're okay with that. And
yeah, totally. Yeah, thank you very much.
Lot.
Yeah, it was interesting, and have a good day, and thank you, everyone. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Karthik, and thank you, Ignacio, for the wonderful talk. I'm of the opinion that the participants have benefited greatly from you. Participants, the next talk is lined and ready to go. Jordi.
I'm here.
Yeah, the floor is yours, and I am highlighting the speakers.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm really glad to introduce our distinguished speakers for the next talk, which is about AI and big data from space. This is a very special panel because thank you to Professor Mihai Datcu from DLR. We could align a very international panel that are present today in different countries. So first of all, we have Professor Mihai Datcu, that is at DLR, the German Aerospace Center. We have also Dr. Jacqueline Lemoine, that is at NASA and is program manager there. She's French and she's in the United States. Mr. Datcu is Romanian and in Germany. We have Dr. Xuping Jia, that is at University of New South Wales, and she's Chinese in Australia. And we have also Professor Jurandir Zulo at University of Campinas in Brazil. All these live. So we are very proud of having such an international panel for ISU. So they will talk about the topic of applications of AI and big data from space. And I leave the floor to Professor Mihai Datcu. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I try to share the screen. So I would like to start the presentation with a very short movie in which I would like to underline the idea of big data from space and the technology of artificial intelligence, which is extracting the knowledge and information from this large volume of data. So actually we have many sensors in space. They are recording signals about Earth, about planets, about cosmos. All these signals have to be transformed in products. They need to be calibrated, formatted. These are high-performance computing at the German Aerospace Center, which are transforming signals from the satellites in products. All these products are in digital format, and they are stored in very large archives, which are going today over hundreds of petabytes. This data must be perpetuated over the time. So this must be renewed, copied, refreshed in such a way that next generations, they can take advantage and look back in the history and make prediction. However, all this data is digital. We need to transform this data in something meaningful. So this is an example of artificial intelligence, which is projecting the content, the information, the inside of the satellite data in a semantic representation, visual, in an immersive visual data mining system. So the operator is looking to an image in the virtual reality, and the system understands what he's looking for, and it's returning all the images from the archive in front of his eyes. So this is an example of how artificial intelligence makes actionable information from big volumes of data. I'm presenting now just one slide to show the European Space Agency flavor of satellites from 2010 and planned to 2025, covering science, Copernicus, and meteorology. It's only to show the diversity of satellites only from European perspective. Very important thing today, it is access to the data, which is free and open on the Copernicus data. So all this data is free and open for everyone around the world. And it's not only free access to the data, it's also access tools to copy the data, exploitation platform, providing algorithms to interpret the data, data information access services, and toolboxes, which facilitate the progress in research and application. This data has a huge diversity. We have synthetic aperture radar data, and I want to show only in this TerraSAR-X, the German satellite, an interesting example. This is a railway, and this is a train. Why? Synthetic aperture radar is not a visual data. It's a modulation in frequency. It's a Doppler effect. We have hyperspectral data with thousands of channels recognizing atmospheric or material on Earth. We have satellite chain time series to our data cube, like movies from space over many years now, over 40 years, which are presenting evolution, and they enable prediction. But we have also in situ, like photography and GPS models, metadata. And what is particular for Earth observation, we have training and benchmark and taxonomies. So only look in ESA. So big data. Big data is a collective large volume via IT system, aerosensor, in situ observation. So today we have in Europe 40 million of satellite images, but we don't have only 40 million of data. We have a big number of users. We have 500,000 of users registered, working in many fields. So artificial intelligence aims to transform the data in information and knowledge in such a way to make decision, verify hypothesis, understand insight, make prediction. So we have artificial intelligence taking the data and transforming information, and also in compact representation, analytical representation, quantitative and semantic for using. As observation, it's a technological convergence. We don't deal only with images. We need to know the sensor. We need to know the mission, the orbit. The mission is controlled. We have a ground segment production of the, we have information platform, and we have science methods. And from this, we have a feedback back to the design of the next generation of sensor and missions. And so intelligence, it's an intelligence which goes from the mission to the many applications like climate, object, infrastructure, illegal deforestation, demining, or illegal mining. So a very short summary. Earth observation, space, deals with mission intelligence, sensor, data intelligence, application, business intelligence. It's a whole frame, it's a convergence of technologies. And I go now briefly on some trends. One important trend today is physics-aware explainable AI. We are not like in computer vision working with a single type of data. We work with sensor, instrument data. We need to understand how the synthetic aperture radar was generated, which are the basic signature in the frequency domain, which helps to understand the scene. So it's about understanding the physics and encapsulating the physics. Visual data mining is very important because a large volume of data, they need to be transformed in easy to understand platforms, integrating results, algorithms, maps, transforming data in simple representation. And definitely we go to sensor intelligence. We have a sensor in space illuminating the city. We have a reflection back to the satellite to have one image, but we have another image on the roof of the university with antennas. So these are signals which can be processed by comprehensive sensing and deep learning, generating new information. And this technology goes now in space, in formation flying. Formation flying needs position satellites, and radar technology allows to process signals transmitting between the two satellites to put them together in a very precise position. Such a new instrument can be implemented in space. And we have fantastic resources, quantum. So today, quantum is not anymore theory. So quantum goes to technology. We have quantum information, quantum communication, quantum computing, quantum sensing, meteorology. So in space, we have the quantum communication distribution, which is operational. We have quantum computing, which today goes in Earth observation or has the first results in analyzing the phase unwrapping in interferometry, or the quantum layer for optimization in hyperspectral imaging, or the classification of multispectral data like Sentinel, or quantum embedding, which is a fantastic application of polarimetric data, which fits in the quantum technology. And today we have the human sensors. So we are faced with population growth, which put pressure on resources such as fresh water and food, stress on land and marine ecosystem, environment pollution, impact on health and biodiversity. And we have the global warming, climate change. The sea level is rising, increasing level of ocean acidification, and extreme events like flood, heat waves. And in this moment, we are at the edge of transforming big data in actionable information like digital twin Earth, which aims to visualize, monitor, forecast natural human activity on planet for sustainable development, Europe efforts, and definitely it's a Green Deal. So this is concluding my introduction. I give the floor now to my colleagues to complement the presentation. So, Jacqueline, maybe you can continue with your presentation.
Okay. I guess you can see my presentation.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So thank you, Mihai and Jody for the invitation. My presentation is going to be very similar to what Mihai just showed. First of all, this chart, just like the chart that you saw for ESA, shows the continuum of Earth's science mission since 1995 that provide us with all the measurements that are necessary to understand our planet as an interconnected systems from all the way from a global view to a very local measurements, and this gives us this continuum also in the temporal dimension, so that we can understand from the past and predict for the future. So as Mihai just described, all these different missions represent a very large amount of data that need to be processed, analyzed, mined, and assimilated into the science and the forecast models, and machine learning play a big role in this all of these different processes. Just like for ESA data, NASA data is free for the entire community, and NASA is also moving towards open science, where the algorithms and the software will also be made available to everyone to use. So within that context, so there are different programs that work on this big data and artificial intelligence. Within the program that I know the best, so the Advanced Information System Technology program, we have 3 thrusts that all address at some level this big data and this acquisition of data to be able to understand the Earth better. So the first one is a new observing strategies that looks at optimizing this acquisition measurements, and it's a little bit the idea of a generalized sensor web. And I am going to talk about all of this focuses in more detail. The second one is the analytic collaborative framework that allows this this agile science investigation, and that allow to utilize these large amounts of diverse observation. And building on these 2 first thrusts, the digital twins take advantage of this continuous observation and all of these different models and interconnected models to be able to build a duplicate of the Earth and being able to do what-if investigation. So the NOS on new observing strategies, as I said, can be considered as a federated observing system or a generalized sensor web, or what I'll call an Internet of Space, in which each node can be a sensor, a collection of sensors, a satellite, and these sensors can be in space, in the air, or in situ. But the node of this sensor web can also be a model or any other observation that is of interest, like from social media or from a database. And it can be, of course, I work in US, so this is the node can be in US, but the nodes can also be international nodes. And the goals, the objectives, there are two main objectives. The first one is to be able to respond to a need for a measurement. So looking at the portfolio of all the different assets that exist, being able to augment these assets with new assets, with a new one that can be of interest, or being able to respond of science events. So of course, as you can imagine, these new observing systems are beyond the data that already exists. They are going to create an even larger number of data. So this the second thrust is to be able to take all of this data, to harmonize them, and to facilitate this science investigation by integrating the access to the data, the analytic and the computational and visualization capabilities to be able to facilitate the science and applied science across these multiple missions and these multiple data sets. So this is a little bit technical, and I'm not going to take a long time describing this, but mainly there is a user interface. There is some kind of tools such as Jupyter Notebook or so on, and there is another element of this ACF is to access all these multiple data easily that are relevant to the domain, to be able to access all this computing capability. So it can be high-end computing, cloud capability, quantum computing, even neuromorphic computing, and use all of this together to be able to facilitate this analysis. So an example of such an ACF has been built for ocean science, and looks at dozens of ocean data sets, finds the relevant data sets to the particular investigation. Everything happens in the cloud, so the user doesn't have to download these data sets, can use the analytic tools that are already available in OceanWorks, in this SCF, or can upload or can use their own analytic tools, and then everything is visualized on this platform. So this Ocean works has been also generalized to other type of application, and one of the application is called flood dam for flood prediction. And this project has been conducting in collaboration with CNES, and the idea is to be able to generalize this type of framework so it can be used anywhere in the world. So as you can imagine, all the data that are going to be acquired through an NOS type system can be analyzed in an SCF type system, but the goal is really to close this loop by intelligently defining which additional observation are needed and would improve the quality of the analysis and the prediction, And so this back loop would request from an NOS type system some specific observation, and the NOS system would reconfigure and would determine which assets can be used or which additional assets are needed to be able to respond to this observation request. So if we go to a step further, this really fits into the overall framework of a digital twin, where we have all these different interconnected models, not only science model, but also human activity models that could relate to infrastructure in a city, or to crop modeling, to agriculture, to air quality. We have particularly a project that looks at air quality on the city of Los Angeles, and this particular model of air quality is also being applied to a very large city around the world, for example, in London or some other cities. So all of these different models can be put together with a continuum of observation. So this is where the NOS is very important, because we can have a live or near real-time or real-time observation that come into play. And if we add to this integration some investigative capabilities, including uncertainty quantification, and AI and machine learning being used for not only analyzing the data, but also for creating some surrogate models that can speed up the computations when we do all these threads by doing these what-if scenarios. We get into, we can build this digital replica either of a subcomponent of the Earth, of an Earth system, or a special part of the Earth, and then we can federate this small digital twin to build a larger Earth system, digital twins. So AI, as you can see, it can be used at two different levels, from an NOS point of view for the coordination and the mission operation, and from an SCF and digital twin level for the science advancement. And in our project, we have categorized AI for 5 main types of applications. The usual application, like time series, science model, image processing, data fusion, and pattern recognition, but also a little bit more novel are the AI for observation, simulation, synthesis experiment, and for mission design, which is really related to the NOS part of these projects, and also for quantum computing to be able to match the algorithm to the quantum computer, and to be able to speed up these processes using a quantum computer. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is the big data processing is very often considered on the ground, and up to now it is mainly done on the ground, but we are conducting experiment to use high performance computing in space, which with a spaceborne 2 computer, which is on the International Space Station, and so we are looking at experiments of science data processing on the space station using this supercomputer, as well as a retasking demonstration. We are also looking at coprocessor experiments with the Intel Movidius that is used on the ESA FISAT, and also at the Qualcomm Snapdragon, which is currently flying on the Mars helicopter. So to finish, AI for space application can be seen as a connection of 3 different poles: the science application and big data analytics, which is probably the most developed currently, but also there are 2 other areas of development in terms of hardware and software infrastructure. Currently, GPUs are used a lot. And on the ground, quantum computing is starting, but we can imagine neuromorphic computing or some probably lighter version of GPU also being able to use on board and on the edge, and we need to develop all the software that goes with it, and also of course all the algorithm development and the at the edge implementations. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing and go to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. It was a very nice talk. I propose now to have another perspective from Australia. So, Su Ping, we are turning around the world.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Ah, yes. Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good morning and good afternoon. Yeah, I'm Su Ping Jia from School of Engineering and Information Technology, the University of New South Wales at Canberra, Australia. So we are here 2:30 a.m. Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Mahai, for the invitation. And I really like Mahai's introduction and Jacqueline's talk. So I learned a lot. Now, I'm from University of New South Wales. Probably you know the main campus in Sydney. I'm in the campus in Canberra. Yeah. And for my university, we have a Canberra space and working on the Cuba site. So we try to demonstrate the capability of remote sensing and telecommunications. Yeah, and also the main campus established an AI center, and our campus joined as a partner. My school, we have an AI scheme, AI stream for students to select as one of the degree option. Yeah, so I talk a little bit about the data analysis using like machine learning, deep learning for AI, purpose. So as Mahai and Jacqueline said, big spatial data can be from different platform like a satellite, aircraft, or UAV. Now it's very popular, and from different sensor, say like optical, microwave, or different type of the instrument. And there are lots of past measurements. So we have a time series data as well. Also, now we have not just multi-temporal, we have a video from satellite. To work on big data, we combine with other measurement like elevation or slope and so on. Also like the temperature, rainfall. So altogether, we have the opportunity to combine the information available. We try to get knowledge and make a decision. So myself is working on hyperspectral data, and that's the one type of optical images. It will collect the data at many spectral band, and then there's an issue how to select useful band for a given application. Although the instrument collect the data from visible to say middle infrared at very high spectral resolution, we have a problem of overtraining. So we like to reduce the dimensionality. Yeah. So this publication is about feature mining. So how to generate spatial feature to enhance the description of object, or we do a selection to which band to use. Do we just use color information, the visible band, or we need more features, described in infrared band? And feature extraction means we do some transformation to get a better feature. Yeah. So I feel these topics is more meaningful, more important for big data analysis. So when we have a big data, we do need to find the relevant data, important data, or useful data. So for the deep learning, the good thing is we can work out the spectral information and also the spatial information at a different level, and not only the shadow features, we can get a deep description. Although there's a challenge how to interpret, explain the deeper features. Yeah. And recently, one of my PhD students work on the moving vehicle detection from the remote sensing video. And this is a new kind of new trend or challenge, because the satellite video data has a very low spatial resolution compared with ground video data. And then the signal noise ratio is low as well. So these students has worked on the problem how to separate the background, foreground for vehicle detection. The background normally can be difficult because the sensor movement will generate some false alarm. And another interesting project my group is working on is a transfer learning. Yeah, so this one is the transfer learning in time domain. We have time series data. We don't like to do the training every time from scratch. We can borrow the training result from previous analysis. Yeah, that's the idea. And another transfer learning concept is to borrow the training results for a deep network. Now we like to pick up a subset of the layers. We may pick up, say, even numbers or odd numbers, or maybe first half or second half, depend on the application, the new application. So we just transfer from the previous model to the target model. And then this topic becomes very critical just because the training cost is very high for deep learning. We like to leverage the previous knowledge and reduce the training cost. Yeah, and then we don't need so many training samples, hopefully. And to implement, say, AI or deep learning to the onboard processing, this is possible, however, it's very challenging. So the idea is we train the model on the ground and then implement on the hardware. So later we can have the detection result straight away, say ship detection. So in this way, the downlink can be selective downlink. Yeah, and then although we can do model update through uplink, overall we hope the model is small. So we call it accelerated deep networks. That means the network need to have a function of deep network. However, in terms of size, is shorter. Is accelerated. So that's the current project that we are working on. And one of the students is working on solar panel mapping using weakly supervised. In this way, we don't need to have a very detailed training samples, so we can reduce the requirement for training data. And to get the inertial labeling result is called the pseudo labels. Later to refine the result using advanced method and to achieve solar mapping, solar panel mappings. The purpose is to get quantitative overview of the usage of the solar generation to help with, say, government decision or monitoring. Yeah. So yeah, I just briefly talk about a little bit of the examples we are working on. Yeah, that's my talk. Yeah, thanks everyone for your attention.
So, Xu-Ping, thank you very much for the very detailed presentation and in-depth, insightful for artificial intelligence in space application. And I would like now to give the floor to Jorandir to present applications and next generation of tendencies, artificial intelligence and technologies from Brazil. So, Jorandir, the floor is yours. Jorandir, can you hear us? Jorandir, you are muted. Yes, now showing.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Mihai Datico and Jordi for inviting me to attend this meeting. Thank you very much. Okay. I will focus on the Brazilian agribusiness because it's a very important sector for our country and also for other countries. Brazil holds the first place on exports of sugar, coffee, chicken, beef, orange juice, and soybean. For us, the agribusiness holds 33% of all employments and 43% of national exports. This graph shows a very important result. The grain production has grown 5 times more than the planted area in the last 30 years. So this is related to the high use of technology developed by universities, agricultural research centers, and private companies. So we have a very well developed tropical agriculture, but we have challenges also. Current and future challenges for our agribusiness. You need to decrease the water consumption, CO2 emissions, environmental impacts, and deforestation. And at the same time, increase the production, the quality, the traceability, the CO2 capture, and the financial income. And to keep the land use at the same level or not to increase so much. One of these challenges is the climate change. You are working on this subject for more than 20 years. You have many papers published in journals, scientific meetings, and reports like these two that are shown in this slide. One was published by the World Bank, and the other was sponsored by the British Embassy, and they are available for download. I will show only one result for sugarcane. It's a very important agricultural crop for us. These results were published in the Climate Change Journal in 2018. It's possible to see in the left side of the slide the current agricultural zoning. The green areas mean low climatic risk, and the orange means high climatic risk or the need for artificial irrigation. The big yellow circle is the expansion region, and the small yellow circle is the traditional region in the state of São Paulo, center in the city of Ribeirão Preto. In the right side of the slide, it's possible to see two scenarios, impact scenarios, using the Hydrogen 2 model, climate change model, and the Maraki 3 model, Japanese model. It's possible to see that the expansion region, you have the climatic risk higher, and this region will need artificial irrigation. That is a big challenge because you have already a problem with water availability. So you need to continue the development of our agriculture, considering these challenges. And I'd like to announce the creation of the Brazilian Institute of Data Science, BIOS in Portuguese, or BIOS, is a research center based in our university with the purpose of contributing to scientific, technological, and social development in two strategic areas. Health is the main track, and agriculture is the second track. And this center was approved in a national public call by FAPESP, our research foundation, the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, and by the Internet Steering Committee in Brazil. The investment is about $2 million, 50% from public transfers and 50% from partnerships with the private sector over the next 5 years. That can be renewed by more 5 years. I'm coordinating the Agro track, and the main objective is to increase the availability and quality of information to assist decision making at local, regional, and global scales, to develop solutions for precision agriculture, and to address central problems such as the impacts of climate change and harvest forecasting and monitoring. The scientific team is composed by more than 100 researchers that are engineers, mathematicians, among other areas of expertise. These research come from 13 faculties and schools at Unicamp and 7 partner institutions. And the center is organized into 3 tracks: the health track, the main track, the agro track is the second track, and the method track that links both tracks. 6 centers were approved. BIOS is the only center that has a track on agriculture. The other 5 centers are specialized in smart cities, industry, or health. I will show in the next slides only I will highlight a few challenges and objectives. Come back. The agro track is organized in 2 axes. One is decision support on a local range, and the other decision support on global and regional ranges. As an example, one of the objectives is the integration and processing of different types of available data. And it's using tasks such as crop rotation planning and predicting the behavior of a given culture in protected environments. An example of a challenge that you have here: development of solutions to manage the large volume of available agro-meteorological and remote sensing data. This is an example. The second objective is the use of wireless sensor networks in small rural properties. The third is the precision livestock problems. And the fourth is the agricultural robotics. And the second axis is decision support with regional and global scope. One challenge is the choice of climate change models that will be used to generate impact scenarios. You have a lot of models nowadays. 20 years ago, you had only one model. Nowadays, you have a lot of very good models, so you need to choose before starting the generation of impact scenarios. This is a big challenge, and artificial intelligence is very important here. The second challenge here is the identification of numerical agro-meteorological spectral models available. We have a lot of models available in the literature that can be used in agriculture and environmental monitoring within the time frame of an agriculture harvest cycle and with regional scope. You have many expected impacts. I wish to highlight here 2. Reduction of the agricultural impact on biodiversity, deforestation, that is a very good problem for us, and human health. And the other here, reduction of pressure over forested areas and thus deforestation. These are a few expected expected impacts of agro-track. And the expected impacts of bios in different fronts. I wish to emphasize here too, training human resource of high scientific levels. You are in a university, you have a lot of universities in this center, so this is a very important impact. And the other, internationalize Brazilian research in relevant areas through the associations between BIOS and other centers at the forefront of AI research. The kickoff of this meeting will be in the next month of September or October. And I would like to say that you are open to cooperations, to joint projects, to receive postdoc people or PhD students. And I think that this center will be very important for us and also for the colleagues and in the next cooperations. So thank you very much. My email is here, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for your presentation. So now we are quite in time with the panel. So maybe if you allow me to raise a few questions, maybe to stress the links in between the various presentations. Jacqueline, I have a question regarding artificial intelligence in space. So artificial intelligence started mainly with ground application. I mean, like Earth observation is probably one of the fields which is the most intensive working on artificial intelligence. However, in this moment, artificial intelligence is going to the space segment, so the technology in space on the satellite platforms. How could you see the perspective, the evolution, and which are the particularities of artificial intelligence for space technologies?
Okay. Yes, in fact, when we talk about artificial intelligence in the last few years, it's mainly machine learning, and it's even more like deep learning only, and deep learning for big data. But there is a lot of other fields of artificial intelligence that are going to be developed, especially in space. And when we talk about even just in this constellation of missions, where all the different spacecraft will have to talk to each other, and there will be some kind of intelligent planning that will need and coordination that needs to be done. So artificial intelligence takes a lot of there are a lot of other domains of artificial intelligence that need to be used in the terms of decision making, autonomous systems, and even in deep learning and machine learning, there are a lot of physics-based machine learning also is very important, and also transfer learning. If we think about being able to use a machine learning algorithm, for example, going to Mars, and being able to transfer the algorithms that have been developed on existing data on new data that have not been seen before, there is an entire field that needs to be developed. So there are a lot more applications than what has been done until now.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I have a question now in continuation of Jacqueline to Xuping. So in your work, you approached a niche, a new aspect of remote sensing, of Earth observation, which is a video from space. And also you approach this in connection with in situ observation, like ground sensors. How do you see the evolution and the role in application of this new kind of remote sensing, the video from space?
Yeah, thanks, Mahai. Yeah, definitely. There are some companies they generate a satellite video. I think the video will be very useful for like fire management or flood, those quick action. Yeah, say I don't think it will be very helpful for vegetation. Yeah, not that fast. Yeah, I think basically so for fast moving event, the flood and the bushfire. However, when my students pick up these projects, we found it's not that easy to pick up the. We don't have video data, which can pick up that event. So he worked on vehicle detection, and actually the satellite company, I think he used the data from Jilin, yeah, Jilin satellite, and they already consider the application. They don't just address the say flood. They talk about the traffic control as well. Yeah, so I think that's a good application area.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And if you allow me, I would like also to have a question for Jorandir. So Jorandir, the BIOS center you are running now, is approaching a very important aspect. It's approaching the transfer of the results of space technology in ground application, so mainly in agriculture. That requires very strong interdisciplinary activity. So how do you manage, which are your recommendations to strengthen this interdisciplinarity in between various fields, definitely with a kernel on artificial intelligence and utilization of the data?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Unicamp has a very good system of interdisciplinary research. We have 21 research centers, interdisciplinary research centers. So this helps us a lot to develop joint projects and interdisciplinary projects. So I think that you can use our experience for more than 30 years in the development of interdisciplinary projects and cooperations. It's, in my opinion, is one of the best experience in the world. I coordinated this system for 4 years, so I know the system very well. And also, I studied the systems that you have around in other countries, United States, in Europe. And I can say that you have a very good system to develop interdisciplinary projects. Thank you very much for the question.
No, thank you. Thank you for stressing and presenting this liaison in between various fields and technologies. We have a question, and definitely we'll be glad to have more questions from the audience. So, Bruno, maybe you can help us with, yes. So the question is, what do you envision about the health technology using IE? Are you working currently with organization or company in this area? I don't know who can try to answer this question. Jacqueline, maybe you have some experience.
Well, for example, in computer vision, there are some algorithm and techniques that have been transferred from the space field to the health field. I guess it's what it means, what the question means. So, for example, we have been developing some crater detection technologies that now have application in the medical field for cells recognition and for computer vision type applications. So I am not sure if it answers the questions. I think there are a lot of machine learning techniques that are applicable both in space and for health technology. Of course, if we talk about digital twins now are looking at digital twins for the human body, and I think that there are a lot of connections because the type of systems, the complex systems that are going to be duplicated in health are probably have the same type of challenges in space also. So I am not sure if this answers the questions.
No, I think it's part of, okay, the answer is much broader, but definitely that is an important part of the answer. If you allow me, I can complement this. Mm-hmm. So in our health, Earth observation, it's contributing with atmospheric observation of pollution, atmospheric gases. In terms of health, there are important observations in very high resolution. Happens bush fires, which are affecting actually the health, and also in very high resolution imaging for urban monitoring with microclimate, which is very important, mainly due to a strong event which are coming now with climate change. So let's hope that we could answer this question to some extent. Okay, we have some more questions. What kind of impact could big data integration via artificial intelligence or anything else from satellite space take more on Earth? Any example applications? So I don't know who could, Xuping, could you try to insight to this question?
Integration, yeah. Yeah, definitely big data will, very good question. Just definitely big data will give us some more information, not exactly, but sometimes can be noise. However, we have the opportunity to access those data and better than before. We have just data from single sensor. Now the problem is to address the noise. Actually, yeah, sometimes the statistics can be biased, and then you may get the wrong conclusion. Yeah, that's the very typical. It's just how to cope with the noise, how to find the true information. Yeah, I think that's the big impact. I mean, big issue to consider.
Yeah, thank you. And definitely, Jorandi, you are working on, let's say, related to food security, and I think it's a very important technology. If you like to comment on this.
Yes. It's the examples that I have shown during the presentation. For example, a better harvest forecasting, for example. If you use big data, if you use AI, you can have a better harvest forecasting. I think that this is an example. Better monitoring of the agricultural crops during the crop season. I think that this is another example. The land use, monitor of land use also, to avoid deforestation is a very good example. If you improve the productivity, you can decrease the deforestation. I think that this can be a few examples.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, okay, it was another question. Apart from Earth observation, what do you see as the most promising use of AI in space? Jacqueline, maybe you can help looking to space applications.
Yeah, I think that probably it will be anything related to autonomous systems. For example, going to other planets, interplanetary exploration, and also with a deep gateway, for example, that is going to be developed by NASA. This will be probably contrarily to the space station, where there is also always humans to be able to perform some monitoring of the station for the deep gateway. This will be an entirely autonomous operation. So the AI is going to be very important to be able to monitor in real time the health of the station, the health of the sensors, and when the new spacecraft will come to dock to the gateway, it will be entirely autonomous. So I think in general, autonomy is probably the biggest application beyond Earth observation.
Thank you very much. And it was another question about the perspective of quantum technology. It is a nice question. Jacqueline,
I'm sure that Mihai, you can respond to that one better than I can. But
okay.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean there are a lot of applications. It's not going to come tomorrow, I would say, but yeah. A lot, I mean, related to big data, this is probably the most promising, not only for quantum computing, but there are also a lot of applications in quantum sensing and quantum communications. But I let Mihai respond to that one.
No, I mean, so in the term of quantum, the quantum communication, the quantum key distribution, it's an operational technology. And this goes now to space. It's applied on optical fiber. This goes now in space, was demonstrated first time in China, Singapore, Europe, Japan, United States are working on this technology. Actually, NASA already had plans for quantum sensing, so ghost imaging. This preoccupation exists also in the frame of European projects, also in China. Quantum computing, it's developing fast. It's still not the question of big data. I mean, if you look back in the history on computing, it was an evolution, and somehow we are in a parallel evolution with the beginning of microprocessors, let's say, in that time. But it's coming with a new perspective because it's a changing paradigm in terms of understanding the problem. And actually, in this moment, what is very important in terms of quantum computing and information processing is to understand which are the kind of problems which could benefit from solution in quantum computing, and also to provide feedback to those which are developing quantum computing technologies, as was also in the past, in such a way to direct the technology for those problems which they could be. So definitely for quantum computing, I suggest to have a separate panel because it is a long and challenging discussion. I don't know if there are more questions or comments. Jordi, from the ISU part.
Yes, thank you so much. So I would like to really thank you to all these distinguished speakers from all around the world. We really had a very international panel here. Special thanks to Professor Jia, Xuping Jia, because in Australia it's very, very late. So she's there waiting to go to sleep. And special thanks to Professor Mihai Datku that helped very kindly to do this panel. Basically, we saw that the applications of artificial intelligence and big data are very rich and growing. One of the limits, of course, is computing capacity. And all of them in the same way that we have been discussing in this conference, even though these developments are being done on Earth, they have to be more and more sustainable. I'm talking about the computing power, all the machines that are necessary. So this is why quantum at some point will be necessary. Otherwise, it will not be sustainable to have so many servers and energy consumption for the computing of models that are growing with more data and more complexity. So with all this, I really thank you, all of you, and we hand over to the next panel. We're going back to the moon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Lane. I'm going to be the moderator for this session. I'm really excited to be here. I was a moderator for a bit of it yesterday, and in a few hours, I'll be making a couple presentations as well. I want to start by bringing on Gary Cullinan. Before I do, I want to acknowledge the Aerospace Corporation. They've been a terrific sponsor of ISU for actual decades, and they specifically are sponsoring this event. So really happy to have them. And reminding everybody that the event is being recorded for educational nonprofit broadcast purposes. All right, Gary, thanks for joining us this morning. For me and for you, it's morning. I'm not sure where everybody else is, but this is the start of our day.
Yeah.
I'd like you to give a little, before you jump into the main presentation of Cislunar Industries, I'd like you to give some background about you, about your process to get to ISU in the first place, and some of the things that you got along the way.
Sure.
So it's your screen. I'm going to go off video and mute myself. So it's your show. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks. Sounds good. I'll go ahead and I'll share my slides now so I can make sure that's working, and then let me just get that sorted real quick here. And then with that, I'll give you that background that you just asked for. So
cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So if I share one window. Okay, good. So you guys, are you seeing just the slides or are you seeing everything?
Nope, just that's everything. You'll have to expand the size in a moment, but we're seeing it.
Okay. So you're not just seeing only the slide window, you're seeing also the chat and the video, or?
No. We're seeing one primary slide, and then the supporting slides are showing up. Yeah, this is what.
All right, sweet. That's great. All right, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me here today. This is great. I have maybe a non-traditional journey to space. It's not so strange for ISU, but for the space sector, it's certainly different. I've always had a passion for space since I was a little kid, but I kind of took a different path to get here. I did go to the Air Force Academy for a couple of years in the United States, and I was, at that time, I went to the Air Force Academy with this idea that I would become an astronautical engineer, and then I'd become a test pilot, and then I would become an astronaut, right? And I'm sure I'm not the only cadet who had that roadmap in mind. But turned out that the Air Force lifestyle wasn't for me, and I decided to leave the Air Force Academy a couple of years after I started there, and ended up finishing up my education at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And then, I ended up taking a different path altogether. I sort of shifted away from engineering and went into a finance and business type of role, where I actually had an entrepreneurial business right out of college. So that entrepreneurial bug kind of got me early on. But my entrepreneurship in the beginning, of course, was not related to space, because back in 2000, like a college student couldn't start a space company, so that wasn't in the cards. So I had a different business for the first 2 years of my career, and then I followed this, consulting, financial planning and analysis type of career, where I was doing budgeting and forecast and that sort of things for a large company. Did some I got my CFA designation, which is Chartered Financial Analyst, which sort of a postgraduate degree in finance for analyzing stocks and equities, and that led me to a boutique asset manager for a few years, where I managed portfolios for different strategies that we were running. And then I left that and went back to corporate finance, but all through that whole decade of experience, sort of in the 2010s, I had never lost my urge to be in the space sector and this sort of fascination with space and desire to do something in the area. And that fire just kept sort of smoldering in the back of my head. And I started to watch the entrepreneurial space sector pick up and all these opportunities being created with smaller companies and, smaller satellites, and SpaceX, of course, being able to do its privately developed rockets that were, getting some success. So that whole experience of watching the space sector develop, was really making me feel like I needed to do something about it. And I wanted to get back into that. I wanted to head towards that direction in my life. So I was looking for ways to get into it. And, on one hand, I was considering going back to school, even though I was already pretty far along in my career. I was considering going back to school to get an undergraduate engineering degree, which, my wife was like, "You're crazy if you do that, because you're going to go back to the beginning, basically." But I didn't see a way in. And then I found out about ISU, and it really opened some doors for me to see a new path to get into the space sector. So in 2017, I went to the Space Studies program in Cork, Ireland, and that was really the beginning of my space journey for real. And but before I went there, I decided that I had this desire to be part of sort of the frontier of human expansion beyond Earth. And to me, that included it was clear that the leading edge of that was resources in space. And I saw companies like, Planetary Resources and Deep Space Industries, which in 2017 were, they had raised a bunch of money and it looked like they were really going to make this thing happen. And so I thought that was the place to be. So when I went to ISU, I quit my job as a director of finance at the software company I was working for here in Denver, and decided to just kind of go all in. And I went to ISU with this idea that I would find a business idea that was on that frontier of human expansion in the resources value chain, so that I could sort of make a real impact on getting humanity to be able to live beyond Earth. And I wanted to go to ISU and use that experience to find some co-founders and understand the space sector. And it really did. That really was the genesis of my my trip into space, into the space community, I should say. One day I'll go to space. That's on my plan. But yeah, so that's sort of the background for me. Is that what you're, Michael? Is that kind of
exactly what I was looking for? Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah,
perfect.
You bet.
All right, jump straight in, sir.
Yeah, no problem. So. Yeah, so as you heard, I'm Gary Count, co-founder and CEO of Sysler Industries. And what I wanted to tell you guys about is share what we're working on at Sysler Industries for in-space metal processing, which we see as sort of a key component to this emerging industrial space economy. I do want to acknowledge that before I jump into the company itself, that having started this at ISU, and really the idea was born at ISU, there are obviously, as you would expect, a number of ISU alumni that have been part of the experience, and also staff. My current co-founders, Walter Schroeder, Toby Mold, Kai Statz, are all still co-founders in the company and very active. Gary Martin is one of our advisors, so is Josh Eisenberg from Offworld. And we also were lucky in the beginning to have the help of my classmates at Space Studies program, Anna Wojdecka and Pedro Coelho, who really helped in the very beginning. And Pedro was there for around a year or so, helping to get this thing going in the beginning. And then they had to move on. But in the early days, they were a big piece of it. And then of course, as we've been going, the whole ISU family has always been very supportive. So that was. It's truly an ISU-born company. But anyway, diving into the presentation itself. So I believe personally that we are on the threshold of a new industrial revolution in space. And I think you're actually seeing those elements starting to happen in reality, not just in our imaginations. And eventually, this sort of industrial revolution, I think, could one day lead to large habitats like this sort of cylinder version or rotating habitats that you see in this kind of imagery, this and sort of like the O'Neill cylinders and that sort of thing. But that's obviously a ways down the road. But this whole thrust into this new industrial economy is being fueled by rapidly dropping launch costs. And really, watching the Falcon Heavy land those two boosters was incredible. But the Starship is really the next level, and that's gonna change everything. I mean, we can't even really fully appreciate. I don't think anyone can what's going to happen after we get beyond Starship. And Michael has talked about to me many times about this sort of Starship singularity where you can't see beyond the impact. And I totally agree with that. So that's one side of it. We're seeing this rapidly decreasing launch costs. And then on the other side, we're seeing, of course, also a lot of investment from private sector that's accelerating. We're seeing that, I'm seeing that all across the industry, from many startups getting lots of funding, even moving into the more longer range things like in-space manufacturing. But also we have this, unique experience now where we're seeing this competition emerging between the big space powers of the world, the United States and all of our allies in the Artemis Accords, and then competing with the Chinese and Russian programs. So obviously from an ISU background, I would love for us to all go into space, in cooperation. That's certainly my preference. But this is the reality of the world we live in. And in many ways, competition can be good. It creates a focus for politicians in countries like the United States to actually stay dedicated to one plan across administrations, which is important. It sort of adds that incentive to move faster and to try new things and take risks. So, of course, there are risks to having this sort of competition geopolitically, but I think hopefully if all goes well, it will accelerate progress and not be a detriment. So as far as mining in space goes, and mining on the moon or asteroids for that matter, much attention right now is paid to water and mining water in space for obvious reasons. Like that's going to be one of the easiest, most important things for us to get in the beginning. But for this industrial and space economy that we envision to become a reality, we believe that metal resources are going to be absolutely critical to that. I mean, you're not going to build O'Neill cylinders, out of water, obviously. So we're going to need a lot of metal. And in the beginning, these large quantities are, eventually, I should say, these large quantities will certainly come from the moon and from asteroids, space resources that are beyond Earth, right? But what we think there's an opportunity, and we should not overlook the opportunity for the metal that can be derived from recycling space debris and future space hardware that has reached its end of life. In fact, we need to have that capability in the mix to make sure that we're not trashing, the rest of the places that we go. So I think it's critical for both aspects of it, and especially in the near term, this provides a source of materials, that we can learn how to develop metal processing technologies on while we're waiting for the other sources of materials to come online. But regardless of the source of materials, in-space metal processing is going to be essential to transform any of these space-derived materials into resources that can be used as useful end products. So with that in mind, my co-founders and I created Cylinder Industries to fulfill this critical need for metal resources and to create the necessary technologies so that we can provide these resources wherever our customers need them throughout the solar system eventually, whether that be in space or on the surface of planetary bodies like the moon. Now, this long-term vision for large-scale metal processing is obviously going to require a robust space-based economy where we're trading amongst companies in space for space. And that's, to be commercially viable at a large scale, right? But at present, obviously, that doesn't exist yet. This is, exists in our imagination and is starting to form, but it's not there yet. But we can start developing this, and we actually must start developing the technology to be able to do this now, so that when these resources emerge, we're ready for this, and we can actually take advantage of it. And the stuff that we can do in the near term can serve actual needs in the ecosystem and serve as a bridge to get us to that future. So for systems and industries, to get to that bridge, what we're creating is what we're calling the microspace foundry, which will deliver small-scale, low-cost, distributed metal processing capabilities that will enable enhanced debris removal, recycling, propellant production, and in-space manufacturing. A similar device as this could also be used on the lunar surface. So there's multiple applications here. It uses induction heating to make standardized metal rods. And so you can kind of see in this graphic that we have here, the core system that we have in mind. This is, to put it in perspective for the size here, we've got on the right, we have the ESPA ring. If you're familiar with that, you can kind of get a sense of how big of an object we're talking about here. But if you're not, this is about a ½ meter in length. The core part of our process is this furnace section, which is inductive heating and levitation furnace, a mold, and then some other parts that help to move the product through. At the end, we have, in this configuration, we have it utilizing the rods as propellant in a Newman thruster. So we have both pieces kind of attached to the end. So the way we're going to try to get across this bridge, we're going to start with enhanced debris removal. That allows, the interesting thing about this angle, the enhanced debris removal angle, is that we can actually take the microspace foundry, because it's just a small device, only requires 1 kilowatt of maximum power. So it can be added to a typical debris removal spacecraft that uses electric propulsion. If we equip that spacecraft with a Newman thruster and our device, we can enable it to make its own propellant from each piece of debris that it removes. So this sort of graphic here shows you, on the left-hand side, what would happen in a normal circumstance if you have a debris removal spacecraft that's fueled by traditional methods. They can do, maybe from what we've talking to companies that are doing this, we understand that they can do around 5 missions or so before they'll probably run out of propellant. And at that point, if you're not near a propellant depot to refuel, you're going to have to deorbit that spacecraft along with the last piece of debris. But with our system on board, we're able to actually harvest metal from that spacecraft, put it into the microspace foundry, turn it into propellant rods, and refuel the spacecraft with materials that are on board that are derived from the debris itself. And we've calculated that we can, with less than 10% of the mass, we can actually perform a typical debris removal mission from LEO down to deorbit altitude and then back to any altitude within LEO again to get to the next one. Kind of give you a bit more sense of what the concept of operation looks like here. We would imagine you'd launch the spacecraft with all that equipment added to it. It captures its first piece of debris. We find a cluster of debris that makes a lot of sense. And we did a case study on sun synchronous orbit, US-owned debris, because we're a US company, so it makes sense to target US debris. And removing the large upper stages from sun synchronous orbit. So in looking at that case study, we would only need to process 2 to 10% of the mass into propellant rods to deorbit every single object, each one of those objects, and drift to the next orbit, and then go back up to the next object and do it all over again. And that takes you from really, we're removing the propellant constraint as one of the limiting factors for the lifespan of that spacecraft, and it enables you to do this almost perpetually until other parts start to wear out. Now, of course, our space foundry is not going to have infinite life either, but we think it'll have much more lifespan than the propellant tanks that you would normally carry with you. So that's deorbiting into LEO, and that gives us a way to make that more efficient, and maybe that makes space debris cleanup more realistic, right? But we really would rather not deorbit things into LEO if we can help it. That's just ideally we want to utilize that material in orbit and not have to throw things back into the atmosphere. And as we get more and more satellites, that becomes more and more relevant. So taking that one step further, if you take our spacecraft, our micro space foundries, and you add as many as you need to create the throughput that you want, in a particular situation, you could add those to a platform, say like a NanoRacks Outpost platform, or an Axiom station, or ArcSys platform, or whatever. There's a number of companies working on platforms to host things. We can put those on a platform in a strategic location. Say, again, looking at the sun synchronous orbit scenario, and you could have a space debris removal spacecraft that can utilize that metal propellant to get around. They can go out and retrieve those debris objects and bring them back to the platform. And instead of deorbiting them, we would completely recycle them and turn them into raw materials for in-space manufacturing or propellant that could be used either immediately or could be used, whenever the market is ready to use those. So we create sort of a cache of materials. We can even eventually start to salvage functional components from there. Instead of turning the whole thing into raw materials, we could cut off the solar panels that are still working, or even just structural elements that you could use as they are instead of reprocessing them. So that's an option as well. We could attach a truss, say, to one of those platforms where we could collect those objects and create something like a space salvage yard where we can have that cache of materials ready to use for whatever use cases come up. And what's interesting about this extension of the idea is that obviously you can't deorbit things from GEO, really any orbit that's higher than LEO, because of the energy required to do so. So with recycling, you have really the only available method for removing an object completely from higher orbits. So if you imagine like upper stages and satellites that have died, right now our best option in GEO is to move them to graveyard orbit, and then they're still there, and they're creating hazard, and it can be observed by other companies or countries. And then so what this option allows for is the complete removal of those objects. And even the construction of large structures in those other orbits. And I think that the same recycling technology, is going to be necessary on the moon as well. So we're sort of keeping this in mind as both an in-space application and a lunar application, or eventually Mars and other planetary surfaces. And so early on, to give you an idea of like what is the potential for space debris as an actual resource. We looked at this early on to understand, like right after ISU, in fact, we started to look at the feasibility of this idea. And we looked at the Space Track database and found that, if you narrow down the pool of options to just the upper stages as the first thing to go after, and you look at anything that's large, 1,000 kilos or more, we found that in LEO we have over 1.2 million kilograms of material inherent in 821 stages. In near geospace, we have roughly 380,000 kilograms of material in around 160 stages. And we know that there are more than that. That's just what was available on the Space Track database, which is just the U.S. Air Force's version of that data, but they're not showing everything. So that we know that it could be upwards of twice as much as that in those locations. So there is a fair amount of material there. It's not enough to build an O'Neill cylinder, of course, but it's enough to make it worthwhile to process. It's enough to create a hazard, and it's enough to move forward with the concept. So we take it even one step further beyond the ones I've mentioned already, and one other implementation of this concept is to instead of making a standardized length of rod that's about this big, we could set it into a continuous production mode, and in that format we can make basically structures of unlimited length. I mean, as long as we're feeding feedstock into one end, we can continue to extrude long structures. Now, obviously, we need to manage, make sure that as that structure grows in length, that there's some propulsion around it that can control it and make sure that it doesn't get perturbed by different gravitational forces and whatnot. But it is, because we're in microgravity, we can do that and make very, very large things. And what this allows us to do is to use the microspace foundry to create materials in multiple locations, to create propellant, to transport those materials in places like asteroids, on the surface of the moon. Obviously, we already mentioned debris removal. We can even take feedstock launched from Earth and process it in orbit to make these large structures. And in that way, you could launch just a big bag of material. Even if you think of like a starship, you could launch 100 tons of material, and you could turn that directly into the structures you need and probably save several launches if you wanted to build something very large. If you're trying to compare it to producing it on the ground. So that's sort of the next level down the road of the roadmap of making this happen. Let's see here. So so thinking about the economics of the idea, there's a number of different ways that we have conceived of that we could sell this capability. There's services we can offer, removal services, recycling services, but the simplest case to understand is what if we just sell material? And just to give you an idea of whether this business case will close, because obviously we're a business and we're trying to think about it that way. One micro space foundry with just 1 kilowatt of peak power, and that's not all the time, that's just when it's melting, can produce around 1.5 kilograms per hour. And that comes out to 13 tons or so per year. Now, if you assume you're in low Earth orbit and you're not in, dawn, dusk, sun synchronous orbit, then you're going to have some loss of sunlight. And we're assuming, solar power, but of course you could have nuclear and have 100% productive. But we assume a 50% efficiency, and then we apply a $2,000 per kilogram price for that material, which is currently quite a bit less than launch cost to launch that same material to space. We get to around $13 million per year for each unit deployed. So it creates a pretty substantial business case to be able to just process materials and sell them, assuming, of course, there's a market for selling these materials. That's always unknown, but that's the case with any business, especially on the frontier of things. So that's kind of gives you an idea of how it works. We see, one of the things that makes this a reality now, whereas opposed, in 2017 when we first came up with this idea, this landscape did not exist. Okay, there were ideas out there, but it was not nearly as far along and realistic as it is now. And it was all kind of speculation. But now we see actually the main key pieces of the puzzle emerging to create this industrial ecosystem. And all these companies, have different aspects where they could be competitors or they could cooperate and work together. Like OrbitFab is a great example. We know those guys fairly well, and we've talked to them a few times. We're creating propellant to refuel spacecraft. So in some ways, we're sort of competing with propellant depots, but we could also create propellant and deliver it to an OrbitFab depot, and they can sell it as one of their fuels they sell on their platform. They could also sell the same materials as a commodity and become sort of a commodities node in the resources ecosystem. And so having them and the metal-based propulsion systems and satellite servicing, space logistics, debris removal, in-space manufacturing, all the commercial space stations that are coming up. And of course, this is just a very small sample of the companies that are out there. And then of course, all the support from the government now for building up this capability in space. And that's, I have sort of American and European and Japanese agencies here, but if this applies to all countries right now that are interested in going to space. So, this really is becoming the time to make something like this happen. So lastly, just to cover kind of our roadmap and where we see things right now, we're presently working on a NASA SBIR phase 1 to develop techniques for recycling metal from large objects in space. This is like exactly what we have been talking about for years. This came up last fall or last winter, and we applied to it and we got this phase 1. So we're working on that now with our partners at School of Mines. What you see on the left is the vacuum chamber we'll use to test our prototype system for processing strips of metal in an electromagnetic levitation furnace on Earth, and dropping those into like a mold to make it into a disc, basically. We're showing that at School of Mines, and an idea is to build a full prototype in October where we can take metal, feed it into the system, make some small rods. We'll send those rods to our friends at Newman Space down in Australia, have them tested in their test stand, and show that it makes propulsion. Then we'll be able to show on the ground, metal in, propulsion out, and that's kind of our first use case, as I mentioned. The next step for us is to take it to a parabolic flight. We hope to do that sometime in the beginning of 2022, where we'll show that we can take this system designed for Earth gravity, change the mechanics a bit, show that we can move metal with electromagnetic coils, and show that it actually works in the microgravity environment from a mechanics perspective. The materials analysis from this will probably not be clean enough to be that valuable, but it will show us that we can do the machine, right? And then we're going to take that same version of the machine, scaled up for persistent microgravity, and try to do a demo on the ISS in 2023. And we're also looking at a potential demo of a lunar version of the system for lunar gravity in 2024, with the culmination of a sort of version 1 commercial version of the system in 2025. And from there, we want to apply that to as many use cases as we can. But that's when we see the first sort of free-flying, commercially tested version to hit the market. I think that's what I have for, that's the slides I've got for today. So I'm ready for any questions.
Really interesting, Gary. Thank you. We do have some interesting questions in the poll. So if you have some more questions from the audience, please add them. I'm going to get to them in a moment. We've got about 25 minutes to stay on time. So I'm going to ask you a few questions first, and then we'll bring in the questions from the audience.
Okay. Can I see the questions, or am I supposed to be opening something else up here? Is the chat that you have?
The organizing team will show the questions.
Okay, got it. Cool.
Yeah. There's a couple that are going to be hard to answer, so I'm not gonna like prep you for it. It's not like I'm not throwing you under the bus, but there's one or two that I think are going to be interesting. There's one I'm going to preface and say that I think you can't answer it because I have some proprietary interests, but I'll give you that out when it happens.
I'll answer it if I can.
All right. So all this started as an ISU project. So I think you're the fourth person to say that over this weekend. So that's always nice to see that. And many of your ISU friends are still at some level or another involved. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I find that really startling. There was a woman on the call on the conference yesterday that specifically asked, what are the entrepreneurial interests in the school? She's in class right now. She's a participant in the online class right now out of Houston, and she was really kind of a little surprised that there was an entrepreneurial interest. So let's talk about your experience shifting away from, honestly, being a chartered financial analyst is a pretty good gig, and it's a lot easier than being a space entrepreneur. So talk about that. You said you went all in. Let's talk about those first days to get you to here.
Yeah, I mean, that has a lot to do with my personality, I think. I came to the CFA designation because I had an interest in securities and the opportunities to trade various, securities to make money. But the honest truth is, when I was looking at the markets and the opportunity to make money in the markets, it was always so that I could feed some other dream. It was never for the sake of trading in the markets. Like, that's cool and all, but it's not really the thing that gets me going. I wanted to enable the freedom to pursue big ideas, and I saw that as a possible path to get there. That probably helps to tell the story of why I would make that shift. I mean, I always had this. Like I said, when I first got out of college, I was actually still a senior in college. I started my first startup, and I ran that for 4 years, and it ended up, we weren't able to sell it or anything at the end. It was not a financial success at the end, but it was a great proving ground and teaching experience to learn how to do that process. And it completely put the bug for entrepreneurship in me. Now, I had a little bit of I needed to recover from that experience because it kind of blew up in my face at the end. So, I spent several years working, traditional jobs to kind of rebuild everything. And I had a baby, and so I had to have stable income for the early family life. But that burning desire to start my own thing and sort of have that, it's just an independent mindset that I have inherent in me that makes me want to do this. And I love the excitement and the thrill of, in many ways, of like the stress of potentially, you know, not being able to make payroll if I don't figure out how to solve these problems. Like, I mean, that stuff is real, and it creates, I guess, an adrenaline rush. You know, that maybe it's similar to the same thing I get when I go skiing or something. But that's kind of what pushed me. I had to do something different. And I guess the other thing is, CFA is great, and you can make great income with it, but you're never going to put a dent in the universe managing people's portfolios. Okay, like for me, I wanted the opportunity to do something potentially big and that could make an impact. And, you know, I think to do that, usually you have to start your own company. Well, if you have my skill set, you do anyway.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. All right. So you mentioned in your kind of earliest part of your talk about, you know, you were inspired by deep space industries and planetary resources. You know, those companies don't exist anymore.
They do not.
And worse, there are not any viable replacements. Like, nobody is active.
I would argue that TransAstra seems to have a viable replacement, and they're getting quite a lot of funding from NASA to try to develop that technology. Okay,
all right. I'm going to register a little skepticism, but I'll take your answer. So if they can't do it, and, you know, one of those companies was backed by 6 billionaires, is what you're doing a kind of scaled back version, or is that just not on your to-do list right now because you've got a very specific plan?
Yeah, so, you know, it's funny. I actually was talking to Chris Lewicki recently because we were on a panel just on Wednesday with Space Tech Analytics. And
so those people that don't know, Dr. Chris Lewicki used to run a big piece of the Mars program, and then he was the president of Planetary Resources for several years.
Right. Yeah. So he was in that whole experience for Planetary Resources. And it was pretty cool because, like I said, his work was one of the inspirations for me to get into this aspect of it. So that was kind of a fun experience. But, you know, it's funny, having billionaire backers does not mean that they're putting billions into your company. Mm-hmm. So it's a nice headline, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have, you know, tons of money coming in the door. But one of the key things that he told me was that when they were doing that, and I think those guys were real trailblazers, like, you know, both the planetary and deep space industries, of making asteroid mining go from science fiction to something that sounded feasible, right? And if we just do this, and this, we can mine asteroids and it's worth trillions of dollars or whatever. But of course, those are also kind of clickbaity headlines for a variety of reasons. But you know, the point is that one of the things that Chris told me is that when they were trying to do that, it was like, we have to build everything. We have to build like everything along the whole path, from prospecting to getting there to actually mining the asteroid to then finding a way to beneficiate the material, deciding how to bring it back, and creating a market for the materials after we brought it back. It's just too much, I think, for those companies to do all by themselves. And the difference between then and now is that we now have an ecosystem developing that is going to start tackling each of those piece parts of this whole program. And, you know, for us, we're not trying to create a mission to go mine an asteroid and bring the materials back. We're trying to create one of the pieces. And actually, we're not even trying to be the miners. We're trying to be the guys who, you know, sell services to the miners to make whatever they're mining into something valuable. And starting with space debris is our way of sort of bridging until those materials get there.
Okay, excellent. Bruno, I'm going to ask you to bring up the questions, please. We're not going to take these in order because I have a couple I want to get to first off.
On the first one, we do plan to put this up on a merchandise link on our site, but it probably won't be free.
Excellent. All right. I mean, honestly, right now, most of the space companies are merchandising because they're not in orbit doing their big plans. So,
yeah.
You kind of answered. I want to go to the last question, please. You kind of have answered that a little bit, but I want to go a little further because it is considered either straight up science fiction or it is considered a joke. So give me a reality check. We're not doing space mining yet, but there are steps to accomplish space mining. Is that how you would phrase it?
Yes, and I think that the lunar push is really, I mean, this competition to get to the moon is definitely in place, and it's not changing anytime soon.
Right.
And that government focus has made what used to be a joke a reality, more of a reality. Where it becomes a joke is when people say, "Oh, there's an asteroid worth $100 trillion in platinum. You know, if you just bring it back to the Earth." Well, if you brought $100 trillion worth of platinum back to the Earth, it would be worth nothing. So, you know, it'd be like aluminum foil or something. So, you know, it's kind of a false argument, but it gets a lot of clickbait kind of headlines. But there are real needs for structural metals, and certainly water is an easy first use case that, you know, can make an impact on the development of cislunar space in the relative near term, like over the next decade. And I think the basic technologies for ISRU, and also if anybody wants to make a permanent settlement on the moon or certainly Mars, you have to learn how to use the resources that are there, because you're not going to be able to sustainably bring everything with you like you're going camping every time. Or else we're just doing, you know, like flags and footprints kind of thing. So since there is this competition geopolitically to make sure that, you know, hey, we have our place on the moon, I think that that's going to be kind of the anchor to allow these technologies to develop. There's a lot of focus from NASA. They've shifted their, at least NASA anyway, has shifted its mindset to this, the idea of reusability, refueling, and you know, trying to create, like, the whole OSAM push is this on-orbit servicing, manufacturing, and assembly. Like, this was not the position 10 years ago, and now it is. It definitively is. So I think all that stuff, and it's bipartisan too in the United States, which, you know, here is obviously important. So I think that makes it less of a joke. You know, it just depends on how you frame it.
Nice. When I was actually at the Kickstarter announcement of Planetary Resources, and it felt surreal. And you know, not to throw anybody under the bus, but it didn't seem feasible at the time. And this is coming from a guy who's trying to build a space elevator on the moon. So
right.
my threshold for reality is different from other people's. So
right.
So it was hard. So I do really take your point that things have changed in the last nearly 10 years, and that you know, I don't want you to bring up your slides again, but that last slide where you're showing the ecosystem evolving, you know, you were a guest of mine on another event, I don't know, couple months ago, and there were less logos on the screen just a few months ago.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's how this is evolving. So it is interesting. I'm going to state from my perspective, it is not a joke, but it is not yet real. And I think the incremental steps are necessary. And it's nice to see that. The next question I'd like to bring up is, what is the recycle time needed? And I'm gonna let you read this directly because it's a complicated question.
Sure.
I'm gonna hedge a little bit because I think there are pieces about your tech that are proprietary, and so only answer the parts that you want to answer.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So yeah, we get this a lot, the power aspect of it. So, you know, the question is, what is the recycle time needed to process 1, 3U, et cetera, CubeSat? 1 kilowatt doesn't seem like much power. You know, it takes a good bit of time. So those are all around how much power it takes to do it and how much we could do. So first of all, we're not looking at processing like size satellites of 1 or 3U. We're looking at taking something like an upper stage and breaking it down. You know, say, imagine peeling the skin off of an upper stage into strips, for example, feeding that into our system. That's one way of doing it. 1 or 3U CubeSat wouldn't be worth the energy to go get it, honestly. But the large pieces we'll go after first, and they happen to be the most dangerous. 1 kilowatt of power, it turns out that doing induction in space, you know, you don't have to fight gravity to levitate it, but you don't need to levitate something to do induction heating. we've done the math. 1 kilowatt of power will allow us to produce 1.5 to melt and process 1.5 kilograms of metal per hour, and that's in a small scale device. And it kind of scales with power to some extent. Like you can actually go below that, and it takes longer. You can go above it, and it'll go faster. On the space station, for example, they have a system they've been using for a long time called the electromagnetic levitation furnace. They use it on the shuttle as well. That does very small balls of sample material, about 8 millimeters in diameter. I think it's the biggest. And they run 2,000 watts of power, and they can melt those things in a few seconds. So that just gives you an idea of how much time it takes to do. I mean, when people think of smelting, they think of these massive plants with megawatts of energy going into them. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a small distributed system that can be added together to create increased throughput. And then you would subsequently increase the power, but not in the same proportion, because it's a peak power thing, and you don't have to run them at peak at the same time. So you can actually scale without scaling power at the same rate. But I don't know if that makes the next to answer the question, but I think that does. It's actually not as bad as it seems like it would be.
Yeah. We only have 10 minutes. I'm going to try and speed through some of these other questions.
I'll keep it brief.
Next question. Who are the anchor end customers for recycled metal on orbit? And that, we talked a minute ago about the spaceship Singularity. I think Michael Mealing. That's his number one question. Who are the clients, and preferably who are the clients that are not governments but actual end users, like not state supported? So
I think so in the beginning it's going to be governments, right? But we wanted to eventually move to commercial. I mean, I think we're going to need those anchor government customers to help develop that ecosystem, so that people who have ideas for how to use materials on orbit can see that they're there and able to be used, and then new missions will come up. So there's a little bit of a chicken egg thing here. There's some assumption that if the material is there, people will come up with ideas to use it. There's a quote that I love from Henry Ford, which is I think it's from Henry Ford, it's attributed to. That if I asked somebody what sort of car they would want, they would tell me to make a faster horse. Like, if people don't know that it's available, they don't think that they want it. So I think once the capability is there and we have Starship level lift gate capacity, it's going to be a paradigm shift of what can happen. But
cool. I want to go a little deeper. Hold on the questions for a second. I want to go a little deeper on the concept of Starship Singularity. You've thought about it a little bit. What do you think it means? What does that phrase mean? I've been using a hashtag Starship Singularity for a little while now. But what's it mean to you and your business? How are you modifying your business to react to that massive amount of capacity?
Yeah, so there is an argument we've heard against our idea, which is that, once it's so cheap to lift things to orbit, what's the material worth? And that's a fair point if you're just comparing it to lifting the same amount of material to orbit. But like I said earlier, we see that if you lift a lot of raw materials to orbit and we can process it into something on orbit, then we can make really big things that you can't even fit in a Starship. So to me, you introduced me to that term, but we've been thinking about the impact of Starship and that level of lift capacity for a while. It essentially comes down to this. If it becomes very cheap for people to do something, a lot more people are going to do it, and they're going to have a lot of applications that can use that capability. And I know that metal processing is critical to industrial applications on Earth, and we're going to need to do that in space. And the further away we get, the more important that becomes. So we think that having Starship capabilities are just going to enhance the demand for materials processing on orbit, and that feeds right into a supportive business case.
I think so. It's a virtuous cycle that just feeds and feeds and feeds on itself. But fingers crossed. We don't even have that bird flying yet. So they just got to keep working. All right. Next question. You alluded to it, but then kind of moved away. What legal and policy challenges exist, and what legal policy challenges do you anticipate? Well, you answered one of them accidentally when you said you're going to go after American debris because you're an American company. So let's start there and then expand on the question, please.
Right. So Outer Space Treaty, it's kind of clear in some ways for the front end of the process, because it says that whoever launches the object, launching state, is responsible for that object in perpetuity until it's gone, until it deorbits, essentially. We know that if we want to go after an upper stage, we absolutely need the permission of the launching state, and if there is one, the commercial owner of the object. If we went after, as an American company, going after, say, a Russian upper stage without their permission, could be perceived as an act of war on America's behalf. So that's obviously off the table. But if that doesn't mean they wouldn't give us permission to do it. So that it's always about permission. That's just the front end, though. And then there's this aspect of what happens after we process something? If we salvage solar panels from a satellite, are they still owned and controlled by the launching state? Or is the salvage operation enough to sort of extinguish the liability of the launching state and transfer it to Cislunar Industries and Cislunar Industries launching state? And then the products that we make from the system, if we sell them to someone else, essentially we're launching a new spacecraft for that customer, and it should be their launching state or their licensing state that takes liability for it. But that stuff is kind of open-ended question. I don't think it's really defined right now. It will be, probably will require some national laws to address those ideas, to make them reality, and then usually the international treaties kind of come afterwards. But
so I'm going to ask the last question. We have just 5 minutes. This is a kind of a tricky question. I want you to really dig into it. How will ethics be applied to the business model and core values to ensure the space environment and workers are not exploited? We spend so much time talking about the hardware, the tech, the gee whiz, the whiz bang stuff. We sometimes talk about the money. We talked about clients a little bit. But, at the end of the day, this is an ISU program. We think about the 3 I's pretty carefully. I would really like you to dig into this ethics question. How are you going to apply your ethics? What are those ethics? What are your values?
Yeah, I think we can only control what we do, right? And we can decide who we decide to do business with and who we participate with. As a company and the kind of culture that we're trying to foster, I believe in collaboration. I think that the cislunar economy, the in-space economy, will not become real without many companies participating, ideally across borders, and for the benefit of peace for humanity and in space. So I want to pursue opportunities for the company that support that. We're looking at opportunities to collaborate across borders as much as possible already to build that sort of international aspect. But yeah, there's an openness of our approach. We want to bring in as many participants as possible. We don't mind if people compete with us. I think we're all shooting for the same aim here, and we can help each other and get there much faster and much more productively than trying to control tightly the technology and own the whole process end to end and create some sort of vertically integrated stack. So, that's just my own personal value system anyway, to be cooperative and work together. And I think that's kind of how we'll approach it. As far as exploiting workers, I can't speak for other companies or countries, but I can only speak for what we will do. And we believe in paying people what they're worth, and that gets the best value out of them when they're working. So hopefully that won't be an issue at my own company. But it is a challenging thing, and the bigger things get, the more likely it is to get out of your control. So right now we're a small startup. It's easy to have control over the culture, and it's something to keep an eye on as we move forward if we're successful. So
yeah, I think that's kind of an underappreciated aspect that we hardly ever talk about. So thank you. Right. Last question, to keep us on time and on track, is the bigness of the vision, right? You use the phrase, make a dent in the universe. I think that's trademarked somewhere.
Probably.
It is. So go fast forward. Pick a date in the future, 2035. you're talking about you can make $13 million per year per unit. You're going to have multiple units operating for as long as you can. How big is Sisler Industries going to get by 2035? What is the role of Sisler Industries almost 15 years into the future?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously is dependent on how fast the environment develops. I think giving the optimistic case, we would like to be producing metals in orbit around the Earth, in GEO at L1, on the lunar surface, and by 35, maybe even on the Martian surface or in Martian orbit or something like that. So how big is that? I mean, it could be hundreds of millions of dollars kind of business at that point. It really depends.
That's only 9 units. $100 million is only 9 units.
I guess it could be billions then.
Okay. All right.
I don't think we're gonna have trillions in revenue, but it's all dependent upon the need for materials in space and how fast that grows. So yeah, there's 15 years out, there's definitely the potential to be $1 billion production value out of that. Sure.
All right. Terrific. Thank you very much, Gary. Always terrific seeing you. Always terrific having you on screens. I'm going to turn this over to our much beloved organizing team. And thank you very much, Gary. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks. See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.